This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. I've said it before and I'll say it again. All human life is here. Two texts arrived into the studio just during the news bulletin there. One at 10:01, one at 10:03. One from Ian, one from Deborah. This isn't even on the subjects that we're likely to discuss today, but it just strikes me as quite illustrative of something. It's illustrative of something. That might be the title of my next album. Illustrative of something. Meh. So Ian wrote, is it just me or does everyone feel more optimistic after listening to John Healey? Secretary of State for Defence has been given a speech towards the sort of latter part of Nick's show. Whereas Deborah, listening to the same speech apparently, wrote, oh dear James, John Healey, I reckon he will still be droning on at his Q&A session at lunchtime. Yeah, what do they say about being able to please all of the people all of the time? I'll tell you what they say. They say you can't. But we try every day. And speaking of all of the people all of the time, I don't know if we suffer from rose-tinted spectacles, retro spectacles. That's a good phrase, rose-tinted retro spectacles. But there's something about the fact that the current Labour government deployed a prominent former Conservative minister with a good reputation in this field to look into prisons. Do you know what I mean? It's as if it's a reminder of when things were relatively normal. Now, I respect your right to despise normality. Of course I do. But I think for most of us, it is a synonym for stability, and we generally like stability. I suppose the more you've got to lose or the more you've got to gain, the less committed to stability you will be, which is why billionaires might be keen to destroy stability. And people who've got nothing, incredibly poor people, may quite fancy setting fire to the status quo and torching stability. But for everybody in between, those with next to nothing and those with almost everything, stability is generally quite a good thing. And the gulf, it struck me this morning, between David Gauke and his detailed and quite arresting, if you'd pardon the pun, early report into our prison system. David Gauke, of course, a former Conservative Justice Secretary, and the current leader of the Conservative Party. The gulf could not be bigger. In the space of moments, Kemi Badenoch gave a speech yesterday, I don't know if you heard, in which she told you to get off your knees. Yes, you. Off your knees. Get off your knees and start fighting for British values. Okay? We may get onto that a little later in the programme. But it is such a pool of undiluted mince that it's hard to know where to start. Taking the mickey, taking it seriously, asking what she's on about, laughing at her silliness, all of these are quite possible options. But it's an illustration, isn't it, of how something that's quite hard to articulate, I'd like to come up with a slightly more sophisticated description than normality. Something broken. And the extremities of that breach, that fissure, that's a lovely word, isn't it? Fissure, that fissure that's opened up in our societies between people who concentrate on things that are true, people who try and legislate for a world that exists, and people who exist in this bizarre culture war universe, up to and including the President of the United States, although, of course, with him, you don't know whether he's doing it for opportunistic reasons or whether he's doing it for ideological reasons, or a little bit of both. You've got an alignment, that word yesterday that an early caller used, and I've seen it now. It's funny how it primes your antennae sometimes, doesn't it? It was appeasement at the end of last week. A word I used quite cautiously. We sometimes have a little bit of a chat before we come on air about, is it a bit soon to go on this? Don't really like reaching for the F word too regularly, but that ludicrous Napoleon reference that Trump deployed yesterday demanded the F word because it's the only word that fits. But appeasement's a big word to deploy. We used it, I think, Friday morning, was it, or Thursday morning? And then by lunchtime, Sir Anthony Beevor is essentially going down the same road, a doyen of military historians, all manner of much more qualified commentators than me are going for that word. And then on Monday, on the first show of this week, an early caller went for alignment. It's not appeasement, it's alignment. I've now seen that word popping up in much more august contexts than the time we spend together every morning. The alignment of the United States with Vladimir Putin's Russia. The alignment of the Kremlin, or the White House, crucially, with the Kremlin. There's a phrase. We're going to be talking about prisons in a minute, but it turns out I've got a few things I want to get off my chest first. I hadn't heard it before. I'd heard it. I hadn't understood what it meant. I've referred to it loads lately. I even asked a caller yesterday whether we have a sort of psychological self-defense mechanism, which means we don't want to believe things are actually as bonkers as they obviously are. And it turns out it's a thing. It is indeed a psychological process. It's called the normalcy bias. And it describes a sort of reluctance to believe that things are as bad as most of the evidence tells you they are. And I suppose it speaks to that Orwellian line as well about ignoring the evidence of your own eyes and ears. It's a cognitive bias that leads us to disbelieve or minimize threat warnings. So I've got normalcy bias. The Kremlin and the White House are aligning with each other, and they're going to carve up Ukraine in an incredibly hideous way as things stand. Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail has got his little party poppers out, jumping up and down and cheering it. So you sort of find yourself trying to convince yourself this is not the same as what the Daily Mail did in the 1930s, when they were cheering on the Munich Agreement and the carving up of Sudetenland, essentially acquiescing to Hitler's imperial ambition on the grounds that if we give him this, he'll stop and he won't ask for any more. You see the parallels, and then your normalcy bias kicks in, and you think, don't be silly. It's not like that. If your normalcy bias kicks in on a really crazy level, you end up like Matthew Parris in the Times yesterday, writing about how we shouldn't worry because he's definitely not Hitler. He's just Stalin. That's in the context of Vladimir Putin. That's all right then. Everyone relax. Just Joe Stalin, Mark II, 2.0. So that's all there. That's the kind of thing I think about when I talk about what has broken. And another thing that popped up on yesterday's show that has subsequently been confirmed, and it was only that I hadn't got fully across it yesterday. It wasn't that it wasn't true, is this $500 billion demand Donald Trump has made to Ukraine for control of the country's critical minerals. So if you think the phrase carve up is a bit of a exaggeration, or if you think that comparing Daily Mail columnists in 2025 to the pro-Hitler Daily Mail writers of 1935 is a bit excessive, then there you go. He wants $500 billion worth of minerals in return for the support they've already provided. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. But when things were normal, you could have a Labour government appointing a senior Conservative politician to look into an area of national importance. You could have a Conservative government appointing a senior Labour politician to look into areas of national importance. You could, in the pre-Michael Gove universe, draw upon the expertise of people regardless of their political ideology or their political loyalty. In many ways, it's the opposite of footballification, isn't it? It's a phrase I use to describe people whose party political scarves are tied so tightly around their neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to their brains. If you suffer from footballification and you think that you're a Labour man or woman, then the idea of appointing David Gauke, a former Conservative Justice Secretary, to look at prison reform would be anathema, just as presumably putting James Timpson, I don't know his personal politics, but his brother was a Conservative MP, in the House of Lords so that he can become a prisons minister. Of all the chatter about what they have and haven't done in government, the prisons situation is clearly a very big priority for you'd imagine so, given that we've got a Prime Minister who's a former head of the Crown Prosecution Service. But some of the numbers in what David Gauke has released today are just fascinating. I mean, genuinely fascinating. The number of people per 100,000 that we lock up is now higher by 15 than it was in the year 2000. But that's not the bit that interested me most. The bit that interests me most is how much lower other countries are, with the exception, oddly, of Poland. So we lock up 139 people per 100,000 members of the population. So you take 100,000 members of the population and 139 of them will be locked up, will be in prison. In the Netherlands, it's 64. But you might think, the Netherlands has got very liberal drug policies. It's a very different country. Germany locks up 68. France is a little closer to us, but still a fair way behind, and even behind where we were 25 years ago in the year 2000. Does anyone else hear Jarvis Cocker every time I say the year 2000? Or is it just me? It's just me. They lock up 117 people. So the report published by David Gauke today again does something that we should probably value more than we do. Is it doesn't display any political bias. It criticises all the governments that we've had over the last 30 or 40 years for what you might call penal populism. Indeed, he does call it penal populism. It's a great phrase. Don't snigger. It's a very good phrase, all right? Stop being so childish. Penal populism. And it means that we like being told that people are going to be locked up for ages. It's a really weird tabloid creation, isn't it? The juxtaposition of the widespread belief that prison is somehow a holiday camp and that we should be locking up more people than ever. Prison is not a holiday camp. If you think that going to prison is in some way a pleasant experience or not a punishment because they've got toilets or televisions, then I pity you. Because it means you don't have love in your life. It means that the idea of being kept away from someone that you love is not torture to you. It's not hell on earth for you and for them. There are other ways in which to explain why prison is a punishment. But if it ceases to be a deterrent, it's because people don't have enough to lose that incarceration is taking away. So it's almost as if the life on the outside is such that it's not measurably superior to life on the inside. And that's a national tragedy and a personal tragedy. But it's not an answer to the question of whether or not prison works. I don't know, and I ask a lot of you every day, I don't know whether or not anyone listening to this programme can answer the question of why we lock up more than twice as many people per 100,000 than they do in the Netherlands, or why 120, 136, we lock up over twice as many people than the Germans do. I don't know why that is, but David Gauke's answer to the question is that we've prioritised what you might call PR over policy. We've prioritised front page headlines and tabloid, not just tabloid, but you know what I mean by that, tabloid approval, tabloid congratulation over political efficacy. So the question is not, does it work? The question for successive governments has been, is it going to look good in tomorrow's papers? That's probably true in lots of areas of life, but in the area of prison policy, it's particularly urgent, not least because it is this penal populism that David Gauke credits with causing the near overflowing of our current prison system. So successive governments increasing the severity of sentences, sending more people to prison for longer. It's grown by 10% in the past 25 years, and it has not had a deterrent effect. The figure that really should cause everybody to shake their heads in befuddlement or hang their heads in shame, depending on how approving of this direction of traffic they've been in the past, is the 37.2% of those leaving prison being likely to be caught reoffending. And the shorter the sentence, the higher the rate of reoffending. So it's almost as if the statistics support the opposite conclusion from the one that successive governments of every, well, there's only two, but of both main parties have pursued. And we know from the facts that previous analysis shows community orders and suspended sentences are more effective at cutting reoffending. We know that from the actual statistics, from the counting, not from the opinions. I can open up my phone lines now and introduce you to a queue of people who think that their personal experience, whether anecdotal or actual, is more important than the actual counting. It's why that's one of my catchphrases. That's not an opinion, that's counting. So you do the counting, the community sentencing, the suspended sentencing, even the tagging is more effective than locking people up. And yet, how easy would it be for me now to say, give me a ring and tell me how pathetic you think this is? Probably woke, is it? Woke prisons. well, woke justice is not locking enough people up. We're locking up more people than we've ever locked up before. We're looking up more people than almost every comparable country except Poland. We're looking at reoffending rates that are, I mean, not far off half of the number of people being locked up. So any argument to deterrent is bogus. And yet, one headline today sums it all up, really, when it says, public favours tough sentencing over rehabilitation. And no one, it seems, to now, has come forward to say the public is wrong. The public is wrong. Rehabilitation is a much more effective approach to criminality than incarceration, but the public favours tough sentencing. So how do you answer this question? All right? And I don't have a particular axe to grind, but I do refer more to the statistics than I do to the anecdotal experiences for the overall conclusion. But what I really want to know is what you use to answer this question. So the gold standard today is if someone can have a crack at international comparisons. Why do we lock up twice as many people than Germany? 0345 6060973. But the second question I have is what do you draw on to answer the question of whether or not prison works? I mean, in many ways, I want to ask, why doesn't prison work? In fact, that is the question I'm going to ask, because that way our conversation is determined by the statistics, not by the lazy tabloid sensibilities of the public preferring sentencing to rehabilitation. The statistics tell us we're doing more of it than ever, and it does not work. If the priority is to reduce crime, right? We're doing more locking up than ever, and it is not working. So 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Why doesn't prison work? 0345 6060973. And crucially, I think, why do the public believe the opposite of what is true? And that means you, especially if you're spitting feathers. That is the correct deployment of the term, by the way. If you're spitting feathers listening to this lefty, liberal, woke nonsense, who cares about figures? You can prove anything with facts. Why do you believe the opposite of what is true? Why do you believe that prison works when it clearly doesn't? Or, of course, do what I do and step back and try and analyse other people's mindset, other people's thinking. Here is all the evidence you could ever need in a million years to prove it doesn't work. We're locking up more people than ever, and the problems are bigger than ever. So why doesn't it work? And why does the public still think that it does? 0345 6060973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 10. Why isn't prison working, despite the fact that we're doing more of it than ever before? And why does the British public believe the opposite? There you go. Two quite straightforward questions. I don't know if there is a press 1 for overthinking option on the switchboard today. Possibly that would be the second question. Dean's in Chiswick. Dean, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
Bit nervous.
Oh, it's only me.
Well, basically, prison doesn't work. I got a 6.5 year sentence at the end of 21 for being bad, basically.
Yes.
I'd stayed out of trouble all my life. I'd been a worker all my life. I got into the drug scene, which led me to prison. So I got that sentence, and basically it was in the start of COVID, really. Oh, gosh. And
so you only just got out then?
Yeah, basically at the end of 24 I got out.
Okay.
So what happened, they just locked me in a room for 23 hours a day. I was at Onley, HMP Onley, which is a working jail, or supposed to be a working jail.
Yes.
So that whole duration I was there, I didn't leave the cell once to go to work. I was on bang up for 23 hours, and the staff are no help to you whatsoever. They don't want to help you. And even when I left in 24, they were still running the COVID regime, basically 23 hours. They'd opened it up for work, but they hadn't opened it to the visiting hall by the time I had left. And the staff were just they just don't care. They really don't care.
This is part of Chris Grayling's legacy, the replacement of I don't want to pretend that things were brilliant in the past, but a lot of people have told me from the prison service that the replacement of experienced officers with a desire to do the job with much cheaper young people who are just sort of going through the situations vacant column and thinking I'll have a go at that has impacted in every area of prison life. I didn't know the stuff about COVID, but again, it makes sense because if you're short-staffed, then having a COVID regime in place allows you to operate a prison on a much lower personnel count than you would have if the prison was operating properly. But what do you say? And this is the crux of the conversation, Dean. You've led us straight to the water. First call in. What do you say to people who listen to this and go, well, good, that sounds bloody awful, and so it should?
What, for getting in trouble? That you should be punished in that way?
Well, I don't really care how you're punished, but the worse it is... Go on.
I was lucky. I was pure lucky. I wanted to get myself off the drugs.
Right.
When I was in prison, they put me on to their medication to get me off it.
Okay.
But when I was coming up to my release date to sign my release papers and my what's it called, like my plan ahead, they wanted to put me back on to an opiate-based drug.
Right.
As part of my release plan. And I said, well, why have I done that if I've been a year and a half clean?
Because they thought that would make you less likely to go back on the heroin.
Go back, yeah. That's what they were saying.
God, I haven't heard that before.
It, and I had to fight with the governor. It eventually let me 2 weeks. They held me extra before they released me because I was refusing to sign that I wanted to take the medication. Because I just thought...
I understand. I mean, in a way, it's a symptom of the disease you're describing, isn't it? That they'll be going for the easiest path, the path of least resistance at almost every turn. For the second question, why do you think... I mean, and you could be used as an example of prison working, because it sounds like you've sorted yourself out and you're not going to reoffend.
But I was lucky.
Yes.
That was my other... Well, lucky in one sense, but terribly unlucky. When I was released... My mum passed away 2 weeks after I was released from jail.
I'm sorry.
I was an only child, so my mum left me a large inheritance. So, to be fair, I was able to get myself back on my feet, get myself housed, because they refused to house me when I left. I was able to get myself housed.
So it's a strange sort of luck because it involved losing your mum, but it's a powerful point.
If that didn't have happened. If I'd have come out... Then
the temptations to return to your old ways would have been much, much harder to resist. Why do you think the British public is convinced that black is white, that up is down, and that prison works? And the longer the prison sentence, the better it is for everybody, despite the fact that you're 37%.
Because I think you're small-minded.
That's a bit unkind.
It's not unkind, because a lot of people think that it does work, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. Like, I'd say 90% of the people will reoffend. I'm in the 110%, probably 5% of that. That I didn't want to reoffend. I wanted to get clean. I wanted to be...
It's not quite... Yeah, I hear you. It's not... I mean, again, if we're going to be worshipping at the altar of statistics, we've got to get them right. It's about 37.2% likely to reoffend. But if you're going at people with sentences shorter than 12 months, that figure goes up to 57%. And the concurrent research shows that community orders and suspended sentences were more effective at cutting reoffending. So I think you make a brilliant point about out of sight, out of mind. So where does to use Dean's phrase, the small-minded, to use my phrase, the tabloid sensibility, where does that lead us? Oh, they've locked him up. Good. End of conversation. Is it going to work? No. Is it going to make him less likely to reoffend? No. Is he going to have any rehabilitation? Is he going to get proper help dealing with issues? No. Is he going to be able to earn money? No. But they've locked him up. Yes. Good. Fantastic. We've locked up more people than ever before. We're looking up 10% more people now than we were in 2000. Great. Is it working? Don't care. Lock them up. And that is, of course, where the phrase "throw away the key" comes from. Don't care about what happens in prison. Just throw away the key. It's coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where two questions are in front of us. Why doesn't prison work? And why does the British public believe in numbers and on scale that it does? 0345 60 60 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I don't know how long that will be true for, but there are currently a couple of phone lines free. The time now is 10:30, and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. I like these conversations. If I'm doing my job correctly, then even if we're exploring territory we've explored together before, we will stumble across new understandings, new points, new nuggets of knowledge. There's a fascinating tension here between two perfectly feasible positions. Let me find one of the best examples of position one. Here it is. This is good. Grant writes, good morning, James. It's quite simple, really. The longer an offender is inside, the longer they're not out in the community committing crime. Burglars can't go burgling and sex offenders can't harm kids. You're not going to hear much from me on the subject of sentencing for sex offenders, Grant, particularly where children are involved. I don't think those sentences are long enough, partly for the point that you raise. And I would struggle to go down the rehabilitation route for particular types of crime that offenders on a visceral, on an unbearable level. But of course, the opposite point is that if you are prioritising a reduction in the commission of crime, then however long they are inside, what you want to be addressing is whether they will return to their criminal ways when they are released. And the longer they're inside, the less they've got to come out to. So we know that for shorter sentences, reoffending is higher because they go straight back into the old life that they had and start behaving in the ways that they did before. But you're still looking at 37.2% for longer sentences. And you can both be right. Both of those positions can be correct. You can say, the longer they're locked up, the longer they're not committing crimes. But if you then say, but when they get out, they are much more likely to go back to committing crimes than they would have been if they'd been sentenced differently, i.e. not locked up even. And murder, sex offending, things like that are off the table in a lot of these conversations. We're talking about lower level crime. Then you actually end up doing the opposite of what you want. So unless you lock everybody up forever, and we're back to the reasons why throw away the key as a figure of speech, unless you lock everybody up forever, you have to find a way of making prison work better, or making punishment, making justice work better. Bill's in Edmonton. Bill, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I was a serving prison officer 4 years back 17 years ago now.
Okay.
But prison works, your fella just there, Grant, was it mentioned about the fact that if you are locked up, and if you've ever been burgled and you didn't mention burglaries, you mentioned sex crime and murder as things that, yes, you would agree that they should be locked up. But car crime is something that can really devastate you. And having your kid's phone stolen or all sorts of things can cause an awful lot of upset. And if they're not locked up, then they're out and about in the community.
And so you come at it as the victim, and the victim wants a form of vengeance.
No. I'd screw vengeance, James. Honestly, I think me personally, this might sound very, very extreme.
Go on.
If you could put somebody on a luxury cruise for 4 weeks and they never commit crime again, right? I would rather that than lock somebody up for 30 years hard labour. They come out and ruin somebody else's life.
Yes.
So forget vengeance. People allow their emotions to take over, and that's a big problem when you look at criminality and imprisonment and whatever else.
But it's an answer to the question I'm asking about why the public believe.
No, it's not vengeance. It's not. I don't want another victim.
No, you don't. But a lot of people do. I mean, I would. When we got burgled, I would have for about a week after that experience. I could have been a Daily Mail columnist writing about hanging them and flogging them and bringing back the birch.
That's you, James. That's
yes,
you and your emotions.
Yes,
what
of course
do you
it
think? No, hold on. What do you think about putting somebody else through that if that person isn't put away? Because they're going to go and do it. If they're out and they're not receiving rehabilitation whilst they're sort of at home or whatever else, then they're going to do it again. These people, and just to address one aspect of why prison fails catastrophically,
yes,
it is in the rehabilitation. And one aspect of criminality, I think, is across the board, and it's something that I've never hear people address. They talk about education or work, getting into this. Virtually every act of criminality is an act of intense selfishness, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't do that to that person, James, not because of that you might get caught, whatever. You just couldn't see somebody suffer like that.
Correct.
That reckless driving, that thieving of that phone, that burglary, that sex assault, that violent assault is an act of intense. And when you work with these people, James, it hits you like a train. It shocked me, the unbelievable level of selfishness. All right, so that needs to be addressed in prison, and it isn't. That's the first point.
Okay.
If you came up with the worst possible environment to address selfishness, you come up with prison.
Oh.
Because when you're deprived of something, if you had everything taken away from you, James, you personally would become more selfish. You're looking out for yourself more. They're in prison. They're deprived of everything. So that selfish person now becomes different level selfish. We are products of our environment as well. And when we say environment, we mean the people that we surround ourselves with. When you're surrounded by uber selfish people, on top of the fact that you're selfish in the first place, it's a terrible place. And people talk about...
I hear you. And I understand what you're saying. And I don't want to go full bleeding heart at this point in the conversation, but I don't actually... I shouldn't straight. No, me, I mean. I don't want to nod too enthusiastically when you said I wouldn't do that. Because because you then move immediately onto environment. And if I'd grown up in an environment where I got no support, I'm not suggesting that any criminality is excusable, but it has to be explainable.
No, you're right. Unfortunately,
I can't say that I would have never have done these things.
Unfortunately, you're right, James.
Yeah.
There, but for the great, you work in prison, and on a number of occasions, on a daily basis, you'd be saying, if you were honest and you forgot your politics or forgot your own emotions, you would look at it rationally and say, you know what, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I'm telling you, and in prison, that's the point I'm trying to make. Of all the things that they try to address in prison, the personal, the outlook that people have is virtually never. Yes, there's sort of.
But that's what rehabilitation is. It's changing the way people look at the world.
There isn't any. There's none of rehabilitation. Listen, there are workshops. There's education, all of which is voluntary. You're not made to go on it, which is another contentious issue, because people will lounge in it.
But you don't want people, if you're there and you want to be there, you don't necessarily, we may get onto this later in the programme when we talk about discipline in schools, you don't necessarily want the room to be full of people who don't want to be there. But I take your point.
Yeah, but there's a number of personal issues that prisons have got, and what a perfect place, what a perfect time. You've got them sort of, for want of a different word, a captured audience, if you like. You've got them there. It's a perfect opportunity to teach them about being
and
less selfish,
that is the best answer to the question of why doesn't it work. The answer is because of what happens when you are inside, and then it becomes almost irrelevant how long you are inside for, because none of and that's why a couple of people who were saying it doesn't matter what happens in prison, it's all about taking them off the streets. They thought you were endorsing the same argument that they're endorsing, but I mean, you're not. You're essentially saying that prison will never serve the purpose of stopping people being criminals until it tries to address rehabilitation. And that might involve different sentencing. It might involve non-custodial sentences. It might involve longer sentences for some people, shorter sentences for others. But it's about what happens when the gates shut.
I agree. But I think we need to look at who are the most important people in this whole scenario, James. You could say the victims, but they're already a victim. Yeah. It's not the prison. It's the next potential victim is the most important person. And then what can we do about stopping that person getting burgled or mugged or sexually assaulted? What can we do to stop that? It's not about our emotions, lock them up.
Well, except it is. No, of course it is. Because some people listening are thinking, well, obviously, the best way that you stop someone else from being a victim of crime is never let that criminal out of prison again.
Yeah, well, that's just barbaric, isn't it?
I know that, and you know that.
We could be in that situation, given that we were brought up in that environment ourselves. So we're supposedly civilized.
So you need the empathy.
Supposedly civilized.
And absolutely,
you need empathy and you need understanding, but you need to address this selfishness thing. Honest to God, if there was no such thing as selfishness, James, if you think about it, there would be no such thing as prison. I guarantee it. They wouldn't exist, and it's something that's never ever
really
addressed.
Good point. You know what a pedant I am. I just don't think it's quite the right word.
Yeah,
I know what you're describing. It's but because it doesn't accommodate the there but for the grace of God element of the phenomenon that we're discussing. Do you see what I mean? Selfishness is like innate. It's a trait that you're born, so you either are or you're not. It's developed. So it's caused.
No, I think it's a part of your environment. There are people that are brought up, and if their families and the environment are taking from them, and they've got brothers and sisters maybe that are
self-preservation.
Absolutely. Self-preservation, and it's something that it's looking out for me because nobody else is looking out for me, and they become that way. And if you become that way from a young age, you will naturally. We would all be that way. we would, well, more of us would be that way if we were brought up in that kind of environment.
And if you go to public school and you grow up like that, you'll end up in the city or leading the Conservative Party.
Let's have more public schools in, James, eh?
And if you're working class, you'll end up in prison.
Well, no, not at all. But
no, with that,
if
if you end up developing that sort of personality trait,
listen, you know that there are kinks in every argument. There's nothing. It's like saying you get people on the left saying prison is bad, get rid of prisons.
Yep.
People on the right, more prison. Right, step away from your politics. Have a look at it in a rational manner. Prison does work. It will be a deterrent. The frustrating thing about prison is this deterrent thing. We don't know how much crime doesn't happen because people are scared of going to prison or going back to prison. It's a very, very annoying fact in this whole thing.
You're talking about the people who never go to prison. So the only statistics we've got are the people who've been to prison and then either reoffend or don't offend.
Exactly.
But actually, the people who never go to prison are the proof of the deterrent in a way.
But we can't put a finger on that. You'll get people that are against prison say, "Oh, it's not a deterrent." You get people on the right who'll say, "Oh, it's a huge deterrent."
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you've got that 37%. We know how much crime is committed. We can say per capita how much crime, how much type of crime. What we can never ever do is put our finger on. This is how much. It could be 5% less crime. It could be 50% less crime is committed because of the fact that prison.
And weirdly, that depends more on what the public perception of prison is than on what the reality of prison is.
Yeah, completely. It's all emotions and opinions and politics, James. 100%. Nobody will step away and look at it.
Well,
and think,
I think, and I like the fact he's a Conservative because no one can accuse me of party political bias. I think that David Gauke is trying to. I really do.
Of course I will. No, I haven't voted in 40 years. I detest politics. I'm fascinated by politics. I'll talk about it all day long. I hate it. Because you will become, with all due respect, James, you will put your head in the sand. If something comes along and contradicts your politics, you'll either try and detract or you'll deny it or whatever.
This is you're describing footballification. I'm just describing what David Gauke seems to have set himself.
They won't do anything. They fail at everything, James.
Well, I'm going to go glass half full. I'm just going to say he's speaking the same language you're speaking, but of course. He may turn out to be another false dawn. Why did you do it?
He's a polidiot. He's a polidiot. So,
he's not a polidiot. He's a former polidiot. What made you knock it on the head after such a relatively short amount of time?
A friend. I've got caught. No, I'm joking. A friend of mine's got a company, and I was frustrated with. I love. Believe it or not, I really enjoyed working with the prisoners.
I do believe it.
The staff. The conscientiousness and compassion of some of those staff, James.
Yeah, and that's probably worse now than it was then. But you just got a better offer.
Unbelievable. But for the money that they're on, the conditions they work in, nobody knows because we all know, firemen and police officers, but we don't get to experience. We see them in action, but unless you're a criminal, you don't get to see prison officers.
That's very
true. They're so underestimated. They're so. The lack of gratitude, the lack of appreciation.
And that's probably why Chris Grayling could get away with treating the entire profession and the probation officers with such relative such contempt.
Absolutely, we don't see them. We don't need prison officers, do we? When do we need a fireman or a nurse? Or it could be at any time. We don't need a prison.
And that takes us back to the point I made about once the gate is shut, we don't care about what happens next, and that explains why people think that. It's a good thing. I don't care what happens inside. Rehabilitation is for the birds. But if you want someone to come out not likely to offend, you've got to work a lot harder on what happens when they're inside. Bill, thank you. I didn't know what you were going to say when you came on, but I love the fact you came on shortly after I said we return to territory that we've explored before. But if we're on form, we'll have thoughts and learn things and hear things that we haven't unearthed before. And I don't know if you could have proved it in a more spectacular fashion. Thank you. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. So I do it every day so that you don't have to. I had a look at the front page of the Daily Mail today, and once I'd stopped laughing, I tried to work out why I had a curious sense of déjà vu. And I've just realised, thanks to one of you actually, on Blue Sky, thanks to Matthew, reminding me, I couldn't remember why I'd got déjà vu. So the front page of the Daily Mail today, Kemi, referring to Kemi Badenoch, it's time to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. So the first thing I thought was Penny Mordaunt. Do you remember Penny Mordaunt's speech at Tory Conference? We got to fight and stand and stand and fight and stand. and stand and fight and fight and stand and fight and fight and stand and fight. So that was the first thing I thought. I mean, she seems to have sort of gone through whatever the opposite of the greatest hits is of recent Tory politicians and assemble herself in a way that combines all of them. But that wasn't it. Can you remember what it is? I'll give you, I'm not going to lie to you, you could have blinked and missed it, but a moment in recent Conservative political history that Kemi Badenoch appears to be reprising, coming up with like version 2.0. So there's the headline. It's time to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. What did that remind me of that I couldn't quite put my finger on until Matthew sent me a message on Blue Sky? All right, see if you can tell me. 84850. It was not Penny Mordaunt. And fight and stand and stand and fight and fight and stand and fight and stand and stand and stop for lunch and fight and stand and stand and fight and fight and fight and stand. Who do you think it was? And I've also got for you today what I think might be the finest missing word round of all missing word rounds. It's a thing of beauty. It's a thing of absolute beauty. I almost want to urge you to stop absorbing any other news sources. Do not open a paper. Do not go online, because then you'll know the answer to this, and it will spoil the fun that is on the horizon when I share with you what is, I think, my favourite missing word round of all time. But we're back to prisons. And just to give you an illustration, I read those two messages at the top of the show that were polar opposites, even though they'd come in at exactly the same time. Listen to this in response to Bill in Edmonton. Paul writes, what a great caller you've just had on. Cannot say I agree with the majority of his views, but how articulate he was in setting out his position. That's Paul in Disbury. Just on the other side of the Pennines, John's in Leeds. He says, get this fool off the airwaves now, James. People espousing the whole I don't vote attitude is one of the reasons we're in such a mess. I can kind of agree with elements of both of those messages, but the final one from Stefano says, you should get this guy on more often. He's amazing. I can only get him on if he rings in, Stefano. It's not like we sort of phone people up on this programme and ask them to come on the programme. It's a phone-in show for a reason. Rhys is in Manchester. Rhys, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I can lean both ways on the fence with this, in fairness. Having served as a police officer now for a number of years, I see the direct impact that what I would describe as lenient sentences have on victims. I think once you deliver a message to them that the offender has received what I would describe and colleagues would describe as pitiful sentences, it crushes them. But I also see the side that the previous caller makes regarding reoffending and sort of seeing the wider picture. However, the victim at the time doesn't really give a monkeys about the wider picture and future victims. They're a victim now, so they want the outcome that's best for them. And often it's the case that the individual, the offender, is sent for a custodial sentence for a long time is the ideal outcome. That's what they sort of make. It's
what you celebrate almost in the public gallery with a sense of relief or a sense that justice has been seen to be done. What I find a little odd about your contribution, especially as did you say you were a police officer?
That's right.
Is that the sentences are longer than ever before. They've gone up by 40% since 1993, and you think that you've watched an increase in leniency.
Absolutely. So from my experience with sentences, we've often seen sort of a specific example would be around the paedophile hunters and that type of offending. A lot of suspended sentences around that type of offending, which I would ordinarily have expected custodial sentences for. I'm all for rehabilitation.
We can pick specific areas, I suppose, but the numbers are not debatable. The average custodial sentence for an indictable offence in 1993 was 16 months, and now it's 22 and a half months. So there's been an increase in prison terms by about 40% over the last nearly 30 years, and you think there's been a reduction?
For me personally,
but we have to stop there, because that is a beautiful illustration of the two questions that we're asking today. Here are the facts. Why do the British public believe the opposite? And you as a police officer are just denying the evidence of your own eyes and ears. There's been a 40% increase in prison terms. That's the severity of sentences. That's not the total number of sentences. It's gone up from 16 months to 22 and a half months. How long have you been a police officer?
15 years now.
So over the course of your career, prison sentences have got longer, and yet you're here to tell me that they've got shorter.
Absolutely, yeah. From my experience, it seems.
You can't keep saying "from my experience." This report has counted all of them, Rhys.
Yeah,
it's counted all of the sentences across all of England and Wales for all of the years between 1993 and 2025, and they've gone up by 40% in length, in severity. And yet you're here as a police officer with 15 years on the clock to say, oh, well, in my experience, the opposite is true, as if that matters.
Sorry, so are you saying from the statistics they're saying that the actual sentence is longer opposed to more people are being sent to prison?
The severity of sentences, which has led to, more people are being sent to prison as well. I thought I'd made this pretty clear in the introduction. So the number of people being sent to prison has gone up from 124 per 100,000 in the population to 139 people per 100,000 in the population. And the severity of the sentence has increased since 1993, so under Labour and the Conservatives, by 40%. And I don't want to fall out, but it doesn't matter how many times you say, in my experience, the conclusion you've arrived at as a consequence of your experience is the polar opposite.
Yeah, that seems wild that's the case. But if they're but
it's not going to change your mind, though, is it? These bloody statistics, these numbers, these actual facts.
Well, I think we all can draw conclusions from what statistics come from and how we arrive at them.
You can draw one conclusion, and the conclusion is that the severity of sentences has increased by 40% since 1993.
Where are these statistics from, James?
This is David Gauke, the former Justice Secretary, who spent the last 6 months looking at all of the numbers.
What a trustworthy source that is.
Well, he's not an MP.
Was he not a former MP?
He's a former MP, yes. A former Secretary of State for Justice. Well, so nominally, your boss.
I rest my case.
What case are you resting there, Rhys?
That statistics, are how you want to present them, is how I'd argue.
Okay, and where do you get yours from?
Ultimately, from experience...
This is from the Independent Sentencing Review.
Right. Why? The other question I'd want to know, James...
I just want to know where you get your overall national figures from, if not from the Independent Sentencing Review.
I wasn't talking from my national figures. I was talking from lived experience, James, and the amount of time...
But where do you get your national figures from? Because you just said you can dismiss these. You said, I think, case closed or I rest my case. So what is your case? Where do you get your numbers from?
I don't think they're my exact words, in fairness, James. But
you said I rest my case.
The point I make is that I think statistics can be leaned whichever way.
So which ones do you prefer?
For me personally, James...
No. For the whole country. That's what the Independent Sentencing Review... We can't all have our own statistics. You have 60 million people in the country. They all choose their own statistics. The ones that the government will use to legislate and the ones that the population uses to understand what is happening and the numbers involved. I give you the Independent Sentencing Review. You, Rhys, 15 years in the police service, give me...
I personally think for the country...
No. Where do I go? The website, the statistical collation, the expertise that has been deployed to count all of the instances that we're discussing. The Independent Sentencing Review is good enough for everybody else, but what do you use instead?
Personal experience, lived experience.
Right.
That's all I can draw from, other than a former MP giving me some statistics.
No. It's the Independent Sentencing Review that he is using to explain the facts, in some cases, obviously, pointlessly.
Well, I'll listen, if they're the facts, they're the facts. But from my lived experience...
They're the facts, but I know better from my lived experience.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying from my lived experience...
It is what you're saying. It's exactly what you're saying. I've given you 5 opportunities now to tell me where we should go instead of the Independent Sentencing Review, and you've said my lived experience.
I can only go from my lived experience.
No. You can go from the audited, collected statistical facts that deploy countless people to determine exactly what is going on in the country. You can go to that, or you can just go to your lived experience, and that's fine. I've done my best, and there it is. I mean, if you get arrested by Rhys later today, great news. You're going to get a really lenient sentence. If you get arrested in the real world, you're probably going to get a sentence that's 40% longer than it would have been in 1993. And there it is, the most perfect, albeit unintentional, answer to the question of why does the British public believe things that are demonstrably untrue? Because of, what was it again? Lived experience. It's just gone 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm tempted to try and work out who we're supposed to be fighting now. Kemi Badenoch told us yesterday that Western values are under threat and we need to fight to protect them. And I'm up for a fight, as you can tell, actually, from the last call. I mean, who am I supposed to be fighting Silly answers only, please.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. I would urge you not to rely upon lived experience of the last 10 minutes to arrive at your conclusions about police officers in this country, for example, or indeed upon the role that evidence would play in the average court case. But we move on now to different territory. We move on to Kemi Badenoch. Now, I'm torn, almost 52-48, between... I'm not going to say concern. I'm going to say, well, can I have a three-way tie? I can't, can I? Because then it won't be 52-48, and we all love the infernal ratio. So 52% of me finds her absolutely hilarious. And every time you think she can't get any funnier, she gets funnier. There's something about... It's a classic trope of British comedy, isn't it? The fool who thinks they're a genius. So Rigsby in Rising Damp. You know, what are the other examples? The fool who thinks he's a genius. Gordon Brittas, Rick in the Young Ones. I don't. Was he a good one? Eleanor said that in my ear. I probably should have waited before I said it out loud. I'm looking for the best one is Rigsby in Rising Damp, but that dates me. The kind of the classic British. It's almost always the man, of course, who is the subject of mockery. But it's the character, often the central character, who thinks that he's absolutely brilliant, but is an absolute wombat. And the more convinced they are of their own brilliance, the funnier it is every time evidence of their wombattery emerges. So I probably said to you last year that Kemi Badenoch will never get funnier than when she said she never has to apologise because she never makes gaffes. That is something that only a wombat who thinks they're a genius could... David Brent, Basil Fawlty. I knew you'd come... So why are you saying the Young Ones in my ear? I should have gone straight to the inbox. So Basil Fawlty, Alan Partridge, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, he's not a sitcom character. David Brent, even Johnny English. I don't know if Johnny English quite works. Rimmer in Red Dwarf. You're absolutely right. I knew I wasn't imagining it. So there's this magnificent trope of British comedy of people who think that they're geniuses who are actually wombats. Brent being perhaps the best example. Captain Mannering in I'm enjoying this. I might just stop talking and see if any more come in on my inbox. Foggy in The Last of the Summer Wine? Not really. I mean, up to a point, but not as much as the others. I don't think you can have Del Boy. Jeremy Clarkson, again, like Donald Trump, not a sitcom character, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. And finally, Nicholas comes in with the absolute killer line, which is Tony Hancock. Tony Hancock's character is probably the absolute epitome of what we're describing. So I've got an enormous soft spot, whether in fiction or in fact, for people who think they're geniuses but are actually wombats. And the more self-important they are, and the more effort they put into lecturing everybody else on how wrong they are, the funnier they become. It's a thing of genuine beauty. Here you go. Gavin says James O'Brien. He's another great example. Except that I'm not making speeches about the West being under threat, about Western values being under threat. And that's where the 48% comes in. So it's 52% hilarious, and it's 48% concerned/confused. More confused than concerned, but she's the leader of the opposition. You've got an alignment at the moment at the Kremlin and the White House, and she's coming out praising the man leading the alignment of the Kremlin with the White House. I keep doing a double take at the headline in the news about peace talks are underway between the United States and Russia, about the invasion of Ukraine, and Ukraine's not there. I mean, this is what I mean by normalcy bias. That's just unbelievable, right? Turn on your radio, open your average British newspaper today. Most people are not confident enough, concerned enough, honest enough to just go, this is absolutely crazy. How can you have peace talks when the country that was illegally invaded is not invited? How does that happen? You've got Trump's man and you've got Putin's man sitting at a table, essentially carving up a deal without consulting the country that was illegally invaded. I thought that all of these people cared about sovereignty, because we're about to talk about British values. So you can't claim that sovereignty is one of these Western values that you want to defend unless you are foursquare behind the defence of Ukraine and the rejection of any attempt by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to cobble together some mutually beneficial arrangement that leaves Ukraine talked about but not in the room. So that is for me, the divide at the moment on this curious state of affairs. And the other thing, the déjà vu bit of the conversation that hit me was, do you remember Liz Truss? She was leader of the Conservative Party one before Kemi Badenoch. And after she was handed her sandwiches wrapped in the roadmap after about 10 minutes in the job, she literally wrote a book called 10 Years to Save the West. Now, I don't want to read that book, all right? I don't particularly want to spend much time listening to Kemi Badenoch's speeches, but I live in the West, and I really like it. So, should I be more worried? Because these are educated people. These are prominent people that have risen to the pinnacle of their chosen political careers. Both of them have become leaders of the party of Disraeli, the party of Churchill, the party of Margaret Thatcher. They can't be complete wombats, can they? And they are telling me, in the case of Liz Truss, that we only have 10 years to save the West. And I think she wrote that about 18 months ago. So we've now got 8.5 years. Unless, of course, the West has been saved and she hasn't published the sequel yet. So we've got 8.5 years to save the West, according to the last but one leader of the Conservative Party. And according to the current leader of the Conservative Party, it's time to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. Well, I'm all for that. Seriously. What do I do now? Where do I go? Where are we all meeting? Where are we all meeting to fight for Western values? I don't know how to do this as a phone-in. How do you do a phone-in that's 52% laughing your head off and 48% concerned stroke confused? And you can't laugh 100% of the time because this kind of nonsense culture war rhetoric has propelled Donald Trump all the way onto Vladimir Putin's lap. So what are they talking about? We did this a bit yesterday with regard to J.D. Vance, and it became pretty clear that we are talking about a historical moment where the United States of America no longer protects Europe from the totalitarian threat of what was once the Soviet Union and is now Russia. You're on your own. And I mean, it's a tragedy for anyone who cares about stability, peace, decency, democracy, but there it is. It's happened. I can't quite do what's Kemi Badenoch on about, because that's too vague. But I can talk about the West. Liz Truss has written a book in which she argues, apparently, that we have 10 years to save the West. Kemi Badenoch has looked at the recent history of the Conservative Party, right, and decided that we need to be more Truss. I'm going to say that again because it's only just occurred to me. Rishi Sunak yesterday came out in full support, by the way, of Keir Starmer's position on Ukraine, which is the statesman-like thing to do. Kemi Badenoch has looked at the single worst performance by a Prime Minister in the last 150 years. You probably have to go all the way back to Lord North to find a rival. And decided that we need to be more Liz Truss. So we're going to be like Liz Truss, only better. Liz Truss waited until she'd been handed her sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap before she came out and said, we've only got 10 years to save the West. Kemi Badenoch is saying it now. It's time to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. And I don't have the first idea what they mean. I know the stuff they offer up. Kemi Badenoch offered up that headmistress who banned praying in her playground, which I think was the right thing to do. But I worried at the time that if it had been kids saying the Hail Mary that were being told they weren't allowed to pray in the playground, then there probably would have been less approval from some quarters. So one religion with its roots in the Middle East, Christianity, probably would have got a different reaction from a head teacher's decision to ban praying in the context of another religion from the Middle East, in this case Islam. I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm doing them a grave disservice. Banning prayers is good, regardless of what denomination you belong to. Of course, J.D. Vance was talking pork. He's talking nonsense about banning prayers outside abortion clinics in his speech in Munich that Richard Littlejohn has got terribly excited about today in the Daily Mail. But what are these values? And I'm asking, I want you to really understand the importance of the infernal ratio on this question, because it is both silly and serious at the same time. I told you I would mention her a lot, but the woman on the table next to me, I think old Reese in Manchester is probably going to join the list of things I refer to a lot. the police officer who was adamant that national crime statistics are completely wrong because of his lived experience. Slightly worrying, but not as worrying as a woman on jury service on the table next to me in Hounslow last week who was adamant that Volodymyr Zelensky spends all of the military aid he receives on yachts and that Michelle Obama is a man. And now, I can't say, I think Kemi Badenoch is trying to appeal to them. And you can't laugh about it anymore because what you might loosely describe as the radicalised online right are in charge. They are in the White House. If I said to you that Donald Trump's people are putting pressure on Romania to give Andrew Tate and his brother their passports back, they're currently under house arrest on sex trafficking charges. And they're one of them is certainly accused of rape as well. If I said to you Donald Trump's people are trying to get involved in that case, you'd think I was joking, right? So what's he on about, the radicalised online right? But it's true. Donald Trump's administration is reportedly putting pressure on the Romanian government to go a little bit easier on two British men accused of all manner of hideous crimes. Why on earth would they do that? It's a conversation for another day. Except that seems to me to be the constituency that Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss are playing to. And that's why 48% of my response to this hilarious speech is confusion/concern. Do you want to hear some of it? I'll come back from the break, shall I, and listen to some of it? And then eventually I'll probably have time to ask you what you think. But when I finally reach that moment in today's programme, the question will be, what do they really mean? What is exactly, what am I supposed to be frightened of? As a pluralist, as a great fan of free speech, who worries desperately about the way that Donald Trump is treating people who refuse to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, or calling for Elon Musk, calling for journalists to be locked up in prison. I mean, these are genuine threats to free speech. As someone who truly cares about free speech for obvious reasons, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, all of these great Western values, what am I supposed to be scared of? What exactly do I need to start fighting for? Now, you can come at it funny, or you can come at it serious. But if you've got a politician as prominent as the leader of the opposition, regardless of how ridiculous the actual individual might be, the office is important. And if they are saying that you and I need to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values, and yet there's nothing really in the speech to tell you what that means, you have to wonder what's between the lines. And I want you to tell me, all right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. But before, well, you can ring in now and book your place, and I'll play you some of the highlights, if that's the right word to use, after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 11, and it's a serious question. So I've read the Daily Mail coverage and I've read the Guardian coverage. I've got the full transcript of the speech that Kemi Badenoch gave at a conference organised by Jordan Flipping Peterson, of all people. And I don't know what I'm supposed to be frightened of. I don't know what I'm supposed to be fighting for. And I want you to tell me. So I'll give you some examples. Well, no, have a little listen to a bit first. This is quite near the beginning of the speech.
Western civilization is in crisis. Our ideas and our culture have dominated the world for well over 2 centuries. This is not a crisis of values. It's a crisis of confidence that has set in at exactly the same time that we face existential threats. On the left, this self-doubt manifests as an embarrassment of the West's legacy, and in extremis, a hatred of Western history and even its culture. But what about the right? We know that the West has given the world amazing ideas and values, from democracy and free markets to our banking systems. Yet around us, we see so much cultural and economic decline, we doubt ourselves. We doubt our ability to build like our predecessors did. We doubt liberal values of tolerance or free trade, demanding a post-liberal world. It's not liberal values that are the problem. It's weakness.
What about if you want to be tolerant of weakness? Where do you fit into Kemi Badenoch? So let me run through that. And what I want you to provide is the bit between the line. I want you to provide the detail. So it's a crisis of confidence that has set in I'm really confident. Why shouldn't I be? What is it that I'm supposed to be frightened of? What our ideas and our culture have dominated the world for well over 2 centuries. I mean, that's just such a historically illiterate thing to say. Western civilization is in crisis. Now, people might get really scared by this unless they ask for examples, unless they ask for detail. So what am I supposed to be fighting against? 0345 6060 973. We've given the world amazing ideas and values, from democracy and free markets to our banking systems. Donald Trump's introducing tariffs left, right and centre. It's the opposite of free markets. And yet she's talking about how Donald Trump is a great example of what should be done. The idea of what values are under threat. She then goes on to praise a headmistress who banned praying. So I know that you know that there is something here, but what is it? So everything she says, for a woman who never has to apologise because she never makes gaffes, sounds either dangerous or ridiculous. We doubt liberal values of tolerance. What's she talking about? This is the most intolerant speech I've ever seen, except I'm not quite sure who it is that I'm supposed to be taking against. Who does Kemi Badenoch want us to fight against? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And here's a little bit more of the speech. And listen, I can tell you now that if you've got something to say, you'll probably get on air. This isn't like a phone-in about prisons in the last hour where we left loads of people waiting, because this isn't normal radio phone-in territory. J.D. Vance yesterday was a similar question, but to be fair, the switchboard did explode. But because no one really knows. So it's a speculation. You're not ringing in to answer factually. You're ringing in to tell me what you think she really means, because she's not telling you herself. She's not making a speech in favour of tolerance when she's describing taking the knee during Black Lives Matter as weakness or being cowed by a mob. What if people did that just because, as when Colin Kaepernick did it for the very first time, they're just protesting against the reality of racism? It doesn't mean that nothing else in the world matters, but she's being intolerant about people kneeling while claiming that she's speaking in favour of tolerance. What is she talking about? Who does she want me or you to fight against? Who or what does she want us to fight against? Because there is nothing more dangerous in the world of rhetoric than inventing an enemy and then encouraging violence, verbal, rhetorical, metaphorical, physical, against it. Who does she want us to fight? 0345 6060 973.
Free speech matters. Some cultures are better than others, and it's only contentious to say this because honesty has become impossible. People should not be afraid to speak out. We will be proud of our country. Most of all, we need to get up off our knees and start fighting, not just for the UK, but for the West and our values again. We will have to decide between the true but hard way that needs tough decisions and bravery, or whether we have more slogans and announcements but no plan. Don't listen to the media class complain about populism. The very essence of democracy is acknowledging the will of everyday people and then actually making it happen.
Finally, someone managed to get a round of applause going. So again, the media class talking about populism. That these people have got everything they wanted for the best part of 20 years. The Conservatives were in power, in case someone has forgotten, between 2010 and 2024. She was in at least one or two of those governments in quite senior positions. The media class supported them every step of the way. They've got their own television stations now. They've got the Daily Mail, they've got the Sun, they've got the Times, they've got the Telegraph, they've got the Daily Express, they've got all the Sunday editions of all of those papers. The media class are completely on side with all of this gibberish. They praised Liz Truss to the rafters when she set the economy on fire. And what did Liz Truss do when she got handed her sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap? She wrote a book saying we've got 10 years to save the West. Kemi Badenoch this morning says we've got to start fighting for Western values. What are they on about? Seriously. What? Because, I mean, there's two ways into this. You and I can try and unravel what we think she really means. And I think it's important that we do. 0345 6060973. She praises Donald Trump, who's putting pressure on a foreign government to go a little bit easier on alleged sex offenders. How is that a Western value? I genuinely don't. Well, I think I might know bits of it. And I know what she means when she says media class. She means the tiny number of people in the UK media who do what I'm about to do now and say, what's the actual evidence for me being under attack as a member of the Western world? What are my values that are currently under attack and who's attacking them? And why haven't I noticed? 0345 6060973 is the number you need, because the biggest Western value, if you like, would be the defence of the sovereign territory of Ukraine against the imperial violence and illegality of Vladimir Putin. But Donald Trump is cozying up to him, or Donald Trump's people are cozying up to Putin and excluding Zelensky from the conversation entirely. And yet, elsewhere in the speech, she talks about Trump being an example. So there are two or three people she refers. One is the headmistress who banned praying. The other is Donald Trump, who is currently seeking more lenient treatment for alleged sex offenders in Romania. I think that's it. I don't know if there's anybody else mentioned in the speech, but it leaves this question. Here it is, the real poison of left-wing progressivism. So she talks about the importance of tolerance, and then she gets really worked up about pronouns, DEI, and climate activism. So where in my life are those things threatening Western values? Since when would pumping pollutants into the atmosphere be a Western value? Diversity, equity and inclusion. The most misrepresented little acronym, or it's not quite an acronym, is it? Description ever. It simply means creating a world in which people who are not born into a form of privilege get a crack at some of the opportunities that have been historically denied to them. It's all so bizarre that 52% hilarious begins to diminish in the face of the 48% concerned and confused. So what is it that is under attack here? And I guess intrinsic to that question is, who is it appealing to? Who is she trying to appeal to? This phrase, the radicalised online right, is one you're going to hear a lot on this programme in the coming years, sadly, because Trump's not going anywhere, is he, in the short term? The radicalised online right, literally throwing a bone to Andrew Tate. Incredible when you think about it. If you'd predicted that 6 months ago, I'd have laughed at you. It's obvious, you know. Musk calling for journalists to be locked up while claiming that they're the defenders of freedom of speech. But that doesn't explain what Kemi Badenoch is up to. It seems to be exactly the same thing that Liz Truss was up to when she wrote a book called 10 Years to Save the West. From what? 0345 6060973. 10 years to save the West. From what? It's time to get off our knees and start fighting for Western values. Against whom? Because if she can't answer those questions, she's doing something pretty despicable. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Stand up and fight for the freedoms we have won. Against socialism, whether it is made of velvet or iron.
So then we were supposed to be fighting for the things that we had, and now we're supposed to be fighting for the things that we've lost, I think. So I want to know who I'm supposed to be fighting, and I want to know what the Western values are that I should be fighting for. First caller is Liz in Westminster.
Why am I launching 10 Years to Save the West in the United States? Now, why am I launching 10 Years to Save the West in the United States as well as in the United Kingdom? Well, I like to think of the United States of America as Britain's greatest invention, albeit a slightly inadvertent invention. And, if you look at our history from Magna Carta to the Bill of Rights to the American Constitution, we have developed and perfected representative democracy. And if you look at what is going on in our societies, first of all, the Brexit vote back in 2016, and then the election of President Donald Trump later that year, you can see the same desires of our people for change and the same desires for those conservative values and that sovereignty. And if you look at the battle for conservatism now and the frequency with which we get new prime ministers in the United Kingdom and the frequency with which you get new speakers of the House here in the United States, we can see again that there is a battle for the heart and soul of conservatism on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think that battle is very important.
So what? Yeah, okay. What are we supposed to be fighting against? Or more crucially, because if you're being told to fight against something, what are we supposed to be frightened of? Julian's in Maidenhead. Julian, what are we going to fight against and where are we meeting?
To be defined. It's a placeholder. That's all it is. It's a placeholder for whatever, I believe, it's a placeholder for whatever Kemi feels at the time is going to rouse people's ire and anger. I believe that she may not just be very good at it, of course. So, I think Farage's poster, brilliant. The Breaking Point poster he unveiled just before Joe Cox was assassinated by a far-right terrorist, that gave people something to be frightened of. Whether it was false but visible. She doesn't have a poster, so she's just doing vague, here is something you need to be frightened of, but I can't tell you what it is. Yeah. If she points out any particular demographic, any particular topic, then she will be hauled over the coals for it because, as you said, the Tories have been in power for, apart from the last few months, 14 years, so they could have done something about it then, but evidently didn't. So what are you meant to do? If she identifies a fiscal policy that needs to be enacted, well, the economists will run through that with a steamroller or that will flatten it. Yeah, a steamroller or a truck in order to show that it's complete nonsense, as when Liz actually put into effect the policies that she wanted, Britain's economy was spanked for it.
It was as the Institute of Economic Affairs themselves said, it was as if they'd taken over government, and then it took about a fortnight to see what exactly happens there. And yet there she is. There is Kemi Badenoch again, spouting bilge about free markets.
But as long as you keep people angry, I think the main point of this is to show that she is invigorated, is vigorous, is ready to do what is necessary. And sometimes the most extreme form of doing what is necessary is to fight. So she's trying to portray herself in the way that Liz portrayed herself as a sort of Thatcherite Boudicca type of Britannia. So
the thing is, the thing that we miss, perhaps, and this is where the shadow of Donald Trump is long, is they're just really bad at it. So that they might be playing or taking their lead from the same playbook, but they're just not very good at it. So, she's not going to come out and say they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. She's not going to come out and say, the border is loads of people are coming out of asylums and coming into the country. I don't know how Trump gets away with what he gets away with, but he is good at it. It obviously works. They're just rubbish at it, but they're trying to do exactly the same thing.
They're trying to do the same thing. Trump, what Trump has done in the United States, I don't think would work over here because as you say, we would see it for the nonsense that it is in the style of the British. Okay, hopefully.
Touch wood. So it's not I don't. If she was here now and I said, what are the examples of the things that we should be fighting against? Because the only example you gave in the speech was praying. We should be against praying and we should be praising.
I'm doing it now, James. Did you feel that? Were you affected by it?
What are you doing? Praying?
Yes.
Yes, I did feel. But that's the only thing in the whole speech that she provides a concrete example of what we should be fighting against. And what we should be fighting against is praying. So if she was here now and I said, what else are we fighting against? What would she say? Them.
I think you'd get some rambling
journey around the topic of whatever is affecting, many things are affecting this country, James, and you've got to realise that, and we know what they are, and we have to resist those forces that are preying upon
Keir
us.
Starmer took a knee during the Black Lives Matter protests because he was cowed by the mob. The problem isn't liberalism, the problem is weakness. So as long as I don't ask what you mean, that could be construed as effective rhetoric.
Well, even if you did ask what you mean, she'll just dance around it in the way that you hear politicians skirt around giving a direct answer, because they don't want to say what is the actual official line, because if they did, it would sound ridiculous. Or the fact that they have no further details to give makes it look hollow. So they just skirt around the topic. The main point of it, I think, is just to talk of somebody who is energetic, invigorated, vigorous, and ready to do the.
So it's Penny Mordaunt. It's more Penny Mordaunt than Liz Truss, then.
I think so. I think
stand and fight and fight and stand and stand and fight and fight and stand and fight and stop and have a sandwich and fight again. Thank you, Julian. And the other bit that is baffling, if that's the right word to use, is the bit about Trump. People ask me what difference new leadership will make. Well, take a look at President Trump. He's shown that sometimes you need that first stint in government to stop the problems, but it's the second time around when you really know how to fix them. He hasn't really fixed anything as things stand, and it isn't really expected to. But what they're not fighting against is the actual seizure by force, by illegal force, of a chunk of Europe, and the collaborators in the West, most obviously at the moment, potentially Donald Trump and Nigel Farage's outfit, who are actively enabling it, cheering on our enemy, cheering on the enemy of sovereignty. But hey-ho, on we go. Dave's in Shepherd's Bush. Dave, are you up for the fight, and who is it against?
Hello, old friend.
Hello, Dave.
It's against them. They. It's the boogeyman that can't be named. Everybody knows who they are. The ones taking your jobs, the ones taking all your hospital and doctor's appointments. For me, this is so. It's the Trump playbook that they're getting in place now over the next few years. So it becomes the norm. Two-tier policing, be afraid of the state trying to intervene, and Kemi and the Crusaders with Nigel at the front are going to come storming into the rescue to save everybody.
And the question they can never answer is how my life will be improved by the denigration of the other, by you make life harder for them over there. How does my life get better?
It will always become better, because I've just told you. I'm going to take care of everything.
What I like about you, Dave, is you tell it like it is. You speak your mind.
You know what's really interesting, James, is I won't go into too much detail. I came across a couple of passengers the other day that flew across the world to go to this event. It's a 3-day event.
Right.
You've got Speaker Mike Johnson appearing at it.
Yeah.
You've got, I can't remember, he's Vikram Vivaswamy. He's appearing at it.
Not another Trump.
And these two people, individuals, had on board, very smart individuals. One was an author. And they were telling me of their lived experience of their children going to school in America and coming home with sex changes and being cats and identifying as. I mean, it was, when you're confronted with it face to face, speaking to you, maybe a little bit like your jury service last week. It was.
It's an arresting moment, isn't it?
It really is, because you kind of want to push back at it, but when they're so convinced and adamant that they're right, literally up is down and down is up, and if you do just scratch a little bit, sometimes you just ask, well, who? Well, them.
Yeah.
You know, it's so obvious. Everybody knows, but nobody can name. It's like the things that freedom of speech, right? Everybody knows what you can't say, but nobody can name you one.
Yeah.
It's a bit like all the law changes in Brexit,
you've got the co-president in the States literally calling for whether he means it or not is moot, calling for journalists to be locked up for not doing what they want, denying access to the White House press conferences, for still calling the Gulf of Mexico, and yet there are people in this country. I heard someone on with Nick the other day from The Spectator saying he's bringing back freedom of speech. Whose speech has been curtailed? What are they not allowed to say yesterday that they're allowed to say today?
I'm sure the Vice President of America, wasn't he standing against Indian immigrants in America?
Despite being married to one.
And children as well. I mean, it literally is. I mean, I think we're in a world where, sadly, truth doesn't matter. And if you question it, if you're a journalist that questions it, you're one of them. You're one of the woke brigade. If you're a paper that prints it, it's the fake news. It's just a constant. And the thing is that when you sit down and take one as an individual, you just laugh it off and think, this is the new one. The one that they're sowing now at the beginning that we laugh at is two-tier policing.
Yeah.
And that's going to become the norm. If it doesn't suit your narrative, it's going to be two-tier. It's going to be injustice. The January 6 hostages, all that nonsense, but it becomes the norm to where people, I mean, we can go to Orwell, I suppose, in Animal Farm. You can't remember what it was like before.
And to knit back to the conversation in the last hour, it doesn't matter how much evidence or statistics you provide.
Lived experience,
it's my lived experience. And of course, things get really ugly when that lived experience comes entirely online. Your lived experience of the horrors of X, Y, or Z comes entirely from following profoundly anti-Western accounts on social media dedicated to maligning our heritage, to maligning our homes, to maligning our countries, our cities, our towns, our politicians, especially the brown ones. I wonder if there's a clue there. Thank you, Dave, as ever. And also, the other reason why you can't pick a fight with these people is because you want to get a tip.
Touche.
Stay safe, Dave. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Paul is in Sheffield. He says, James, you know full well that there is two-tier policing. You're just too scared to say or accept it. I've said it now, mate. What am I doing? Am I fighting against the attack on Western values, or am I defending Western values when I say out loud the thing I'm too scared to say, according to you? I presume you're referring to the Casey report into the Metropolitan Police that found it to be, institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. You've read the 363-page report detailing the stories of sexual assaults, usually covered up or downplayed, 12% of women in the Met saying they'd been harassed or attacked at work. So very much two-tier policing in the context of men and women, in the context of race, black and white, misogyny, homophobia. I got a sneaking suspicion you're not talking about the way that women, gay people and people of colour are discriminated against by policing in this country historically, going back to Macpherson and beyond. I suspect you're referring to some utter bilge, Paul, but hey-ho, I've said it out loud now and I'm still here. What do you think we should be fighting against? 10 to 12 is the time. I think I've found Kemi Badenoch's speech coach. Before I give you, I think, are they going to come on the programme? The person that trained Kemi Badenoch to deliver this speech yesterday, are they coming on the show? I think they're coming on the show. Before that, let me tell you who's going to be here tomorrow. Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, will be in on air with me tomorrow. So if you want to put a question to him, get in early with your question to lbc.co.uk/question. Perhaps you could ask him what the Western values are we're supposed to be defending. He's a wonderful example, isn't he, of immigration and integration, the son of immigrants from Pakistan, a Muslim who is never happier than when he's leading the Pride Parade through London, and so well integrated that he's become the mayor, been elected mayor of our capital city on 3 separate occasions and been made a Knight of the Realm to boot. And yet a lot of these people seem to hate him. It's almost like the more integrated he becomes, the more they hate him, because he possibly pulls down their pants whenever they claim that they just want people to be more integrated. Of course, you can call in the normal way tomorrow as well. But yeah, this is incredible. This is amazing. We've found the person who trained Kemi Badenoch for her speech yesterday. And I'm delighted to say that they join me live on the line now. God, hell yeah. So what are we moving toward under Kemi Badenoch? What are we fighting against, and what are we supposed to be defending? Verity's in Brighton. Verity, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you again. So there's something a little bit anecdotal to begin. There's an amazing book by Professor Benjamin Noyes called Malign Velocities, Acceleration and Capitalism.
It's not a great phone line, and I don't want book recommendations. I want to know.
Okay, well, it's just
who are we fighting against, and where do we meet and start fighting?
Okay, well, there's 2 things in the box. They contradict each other. One of them is nothing, and the other one is annihilation.
Go on.
And what I mean by there's nothing in the box, right, is that... so the reason I was mentioning that book is because in the introduction to the event where it was launched, the author said, he said, I imagine everyone in this room is nominally on the left. If you're on the right, congratulations, you're winning.
Yes.
Now, this just made me think, okay, yeah, this is, I mean, Liz Truss just said that in that speech.
She did. Brexit, Trump,
we've had Brexit,
austerity, all of
Trump,
it.
Austerity, years and years. The proliferation of neoconservatism in the early 2000s.
But again, I don't know who I'm supposed to be fighting against. Who does Kemi Badenoch mean when she describes these enemies at the gate?
Well, that's exactly it. The whole point is that she doesn't say who they are. We don't know who they are. And so it's an abstraction. And the abstraction is there because there's nothing in the box. You're winning, and what do normal, everyday working people get when these people are winning? They get nothing, or life gets worse them in the case of austerity and things like that. So what do you need? You need the constant reinvention of an abstract enemy.
Do you believe? Yeah, I mean, you're picking up on a theme that previous callers have already explored.
Yeah.
Let me throw a different bit of it at you. A country cannot be successful if its people and intellectual elite don't believe in it. What this means, dealing with the poisoning of minds through higher education. What does that mean?
Believe in what, though?
I don't know.
Okay, I would be one of those people whose minds has been poisoned by higher education. I've got an MA in critical theory for the University of Sussex, right? That's the most, what they would call culturally Marxist establishment ever. What don't I believe in? Well, perhaps I don't believe in not having a critical imagination.
Well, that is another question. What is it that we don't... I don't know if I can put myself in the intellectual elite. It's not for me to say, is it? I don't think intellectual elitism is something that you can bestow upon yourself. But let's pretend I am. What don't I believe in as a member of the intellectual elite? Because that's quite redolent language. You know, that there are echoes there of some of their most hideous contributions to public discourse from the last 100 years. Going after academics, going after intellectuals. I thought she was a member of the intellectual elite. She never stops talking about how clever she is. So what is the intellectual elite and what don't they believe in? And we could go through this speech line by line. We don't like praying, all right, especially in schools. The intellectual elite don't believe in the country. What does that mean? What does that... The intellectual elite does not believe in the country. Just think about it. On what possible planet does that even begin to make sense? I could be wrong. Maybe it's all clear to you, but it ain't clear to me. And listen, underpinning all of this is, of course, the very strong suspicion that it is just pure, undiluted anti-Muslim hatred. It's all about Muslims. You can't say that yet. No, Donald Trump did, of course, but again, he's better at this stuff than they are. So what is she talking? What is under threat? Oh, Muslims are coming. Muslims are taking over. And that brings us back to the Mayor of London, of course, who does seem to draw particular amounts of hate from perhaps the kind of people that Kemi Badenoch is trying to appeal to. Immigrant, because it starts with Muslims, it doesn't end there. Immigrants in general. I do not know. Who am I supposed to be fighting against if I really want to defend Western values? Alison's in Belfast. Alison, what do you reckon?
Well, it occurs to me on the back of what you've just been saying.
I can't tell. What have you done to your phone?
Oh, nothing.
Well, you've clearly done something because you've just undone it.
Well, there you go. Maybe it's just the fact that it's...
And now it's gone again. And now I can't be dealing with this. This is outrageous with my reputation. We'll try and improve your phone line while I speak to Gary, who's in Calais. Gary, what are we fighting against?
As said earlier, sir, what I want you to be fighting against, what they've brought up as well, it's pure and simple. It's off the reform playbook. Everyone else, the people different from you, the Muslims, the brown people, coming in from the west.
But she's of Nigerian extraction herself. Am I supposed to be frightened of her under this reading of the...
Well, it's all about power. Let's get in. That's the problem. And you go back to that area almost of the movie Cabaret. So you think you can control them now.
So these are dark times then. Nigerian extraction, but born here. And she I think. I don't know. I mean, that's where it gets really confusing, isn't it? So it is just anti-foreigner with that sort of chart of we get to decide what foreign really means.
They get to decide what foreign is.
Yeah.
They look at it. It's the same thing. You go on X, you go on whatever they call it now, Facebook. You see the same memes. The Warrior Crusader Knight. defending the West. And then when you actually go to who they are, they're normally some Russian bot from St. Petersburg.
And you get this. There's a piece in The Spectator this week, I think, about the impossibility of being British if you were born to but Pakistani parents is the one that is chosen in the article. But you might as well say Nigerian. So she's not going there because she is born in Britain to Nigerian parents. But there's another type of foreign sort of person. There's another type of person who wasn't born and raised in this country. Or no, because there are people who were born and raised in this country who aren't British. And it gets, the more you think about it, the more confusing it gets. How do you tell the difference then? If someone was born in Britain but raised in Nigeria and then came here at 16 and they are great defenders of British values, and then someone was born in Britain and raised in Britain and works in Britain, but they're part of the problem, they're the enemy.
Gets very confusing, doesn't it?
Well, this is why I suppose you're not supposed to ask these questions or to try and unpick these proposals. It's quite extraordinary. And then, of course, climate change is there as well, which speaks directly to the question of who's she really talking to. Is she just fighting Liz Truss for money? Is that why they're there? Farage is there as well. He's being interviewed later today by Jordan Flippin Peterson. They're all just... And there's so much money. This is the point we all missed. Well, you maybe didn't. I missed this point. I had no idea there was so much money. I thought Elon Musk was a sort of eccentric boy racer with a space fetish. I didn't realise the stuff about his background. I didn't realise Peter Thiel. I didn't realise the people who are in control of Bond villain sums of money have got this ideology. And people like Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss have to dance to their tune if they want the kind of support that can swing elections. It's a bit late for Liz Truss. It's probably too late for Kemi Badenoch. But what comes next? You know, Farage has been sliming up to these people for decades, up to and including the Russian ambassador. So what comes next? I do not know. But just keep asking questions. Who am I supposed to be cross with? A weird one for you next, slightly inspired by an element of yesterday's programme, but also in the next hour, the best missing words round ever. Period.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's at the time, 3 minutes after 12. I had a moment yesterday. I'm a bit wary of going down this road now, and we're going to go in. It's a pendulum conversation. I can't remember the last time I wondered whether my own pendulum was swinging back, but it is. So I live in constant fear of turning into Michael Gove. And the reason I live in constant fear of turning into Michael Gove is that very briefly, about 10 years ago, I did. I found myself espousing approaches to education because that's what would have suited me best. But I'm quite a strange person. Therefore, what is good for me would not be good for you, or even for the majority. So most obviously, I was the kind of schoolboy who didn't have to work very hard all year, but could somehow smash it in exams if I put in very short, very high intensity levels of revision. Before my A-level in religious education, I recorded the whole of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians on tape on a Walkman, and I had it playing in my ears as I slept on the night before the exam. And when I went into the exam the next morning, I was able to regurgitate sentences, swathes of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians. It wasn't just that either. There was something else in that paper as well. I just memorised it almost subconsciously. I did my best to learn it like lines, like theatre lines, but I slept with the tape on. And I got a better grade than kids who'd worked really hard all year. Two years, actually, on that. It was an A-level, actually. I did the A-level in 89, a year early. And that's not fair, right? That's not what they should be finding. A bloke who can get an A because he fell asleep listening to a record. I know what you're thinking. I bet you fall asleep every night listening to a recording of your own voice, don't you? But actually, no, I don't. And then Gove brought in all these things, and I thought, well, that would suit me. I used to hate when I did GCSEs. And again, I'm one of that weird cohort of people. There can't be many of us in the country who did GCSEs and O-levels. So I did GCSEs in 87, and then O-levels in 87. We took 5 or 6 papers early. And then I did GCSEs in 88. And I didn't like what they called at the time continuous assessment, because you had to be on the ball all year. And you had to do work in flipping January that was going to be relevant to the grade you got at the end of the whole course. I just wanted to literally smash it, go in really hard for that week of exams and get over that coursework, it was called, wasn't it? And some people loved coursework because it meant that you didn't have to do everything in a 3-hour window. Imagine working for a year and being judged on your performance in a 3-hour window. So I say those words to you now, and I think that sounds ridiculous and unfair. But there's still a little bit of me that goes, hell yeah, that could not suit me better. And I've got the grades to prove it. I'm not boasting. Well, I am boasting, but I'm not boasting because I am acknowledging that that's unfair. And so those were the moments. There was some stuff to do with being adopted as well. But those were the terrible, terrible moments where I felt myself edging closer to Michael Gove before he came out with the stuff about ignoring experts, I think. But still, and you can't really meet a teacher in this country, except probably the ones Kemi Badenoch knocks about with, who has anything but contempt for what Michael Gove has done to their profession. So I was there in the context of education, and that pendulum is unswung. I still think that the model of memorizing and regurgitating things is not a test of intelligence or critical thinking. You know, look at the way that Jacob Rees-Mogg has got a book of quotations on his desk, so he can look up a quotation and then sound like he's read the whole book, sound like he's read, Cicero, instead of having just read, could you find me a Roman quote, a Latin quote about education? He's never been near Cicero in the original, but he's found a good quote. So that is a kind of blagger's guide to education, and I am a blagger, so it suited me. But do you know, there's another thing. There's another element to this. The opposite, the other side of the same coin in a way, which I also have always approached from a very personal perspective. And it's about discipline. And I always used to, I'm not going back to corporal punishment. I know this sounds very hard to believe, especially if you've discovered the programme relatively recently. But I used to be a sincere advocate for corporal punishment. Don't look at me like that, Adam. For adults to physically hurt children as punishment for poor behaviour or poor performance in school. I used to be in favour of that. The reason I was in favour of that was because, and forgive me, because it didn't do me any harm, I used to say, and I used to believe. One of the most amazing things about therapy is the relationship it gives you with the little version of yourself. It's both you and not you at the same time. And whenever I talk about this, I want to grab 10-year-old me and just give him the mother of all cuddles and buy him a Finder's crispy pancake and a lemonade dipper. I really do, because that kid there, age 10, starts trying to convince himself that he deserved to be beaten because somehow it hurts less. The shame diminishes. The trauma is less if you think that you deserved it. I deserved it. Some kids deserve it. It's the only language some children understand. And that's how I ended up in my 20s and even into my early 30s and beyond, arguing sincerely, as in I thought I meant it, I wasn't just doing it for clicks and giggles, that corporal punishment, there was a time and a place for corporal punishment. That if a child is behaving, and not responded to any other means of discipline or any other means of control or punishment, then yeah, a formal, clearly understood, 6 of the best. Sorry, I'm just going to give him another little cuddle. And I meant that. And then my pendulum swung, partly as a consequence, as I've said, of therapy, and partly as a consequence of not wanting to turn into Michael Gove. Because I found myself thinking, well, just because I thought something was good for me, I always perform best for what you would call strict teachers. That must be best for everybody. And I think I missed something quite important, is that there is a gulf between, there's an acre, an ocean of space between strict and violent. A strict teacher, I had one in particular, possibly the best teacher I ever had, and bizarrely, but the best teacher I ever had in the sense of making me much better at a subject that I wasn't very good at to start with was a chap who taught me French. And he'd been the fullback for the England rugby team. I've probably told you about him before. And he just had no patience with my messing about. That's all. And you can sniff weakness in weakness is perhaps not the word I'm looking for, but everything, like from even my posture. He was the first person to point out, I'd have been 14 at the time, the first person to point out I had appalling posture. He used to marvel at the way in which an apparent spine could bend so much on a scholastic chair in a French classroom, and he wouldn't have any of it. He'd make me sit up straight. I can't remember whether he'd grab me by the shoulders, but that's not pertinent. He was not violent. He's a good man and a great teacher. It's just the fact that rugby was a religion at my school meant that our paths diverged a little later in my school career. But he was really strict. And I never learnt more French than I did in the year that I was taught by him. I went from set 5 to set 2 in a year. And there was a call yesterday. I don't know if you heard it, when we were talking about the harassment of teachers by parents, and the partner of a teacher rang in. And he talked about the importance, perhaps the reason why these kind of situations arise is because we are rightly caring more about mental health than we are about exam results. And I thought, yeah, that's a good thing, but it's not a zero-sum game. You're not going to dedicate 100% of your time and energy to looking after children's well-being or mental health to the exclusion of their academic performance. And I just had that thought bubbling away in my brain when I came off air. And I found myself thinking, maybe, this is the bit I'm reluctant to say out loud, especially given that this ludicrous teacher who banned praying is often held up as some sort of example of, I don't know, the future or everything that's wrong with the present. I thought maybe teachers should be a bit stricter. And that I had allowed strict to conflate with violent in a way that, coupled with my fear of turning into Michael Gove, had made my pendulum swing too far. And then I got to work this morning and read a little more about Alan Ebenezer, which is not only an absolutely superb name. I wonder if he taught The Prodigy. And his hard-line approach to discipline. He's been dubbed the head from hell by one newspaper, according to the BBC report today. And he's been in the news recently because he's introduced detentions on Saturdays. Recently appointed head of a school that had all sorts of problems, Caldecott School in Monmouthshire. Teachers had striked over the amount of violence in the classroom. That's the kind of situation that the school was in. You've got teachers going on strike because pupils are being violent in the classroom, either to each other or to the teacher. And the thing about Michael Gove, if I haven't explained it correctly, is that I never approached these stories from the point of view of a kid that wasn't me. So if there was, I was never violent towards teachers, although teachers were violent towards me. If there was trouble in class, I'd have been in the middle of it, right? Things were kicking off in class, I'd have been in the middle of it. How many kids in that class wished that we'd shut up and sit down so they could just get on with doing their lessons, right? And that is why I think when he describes strict discipline and firm boundaries, I think it might be wrong to dismiss him as some sort of Victorian monster. Then he says a couple of things I'm not 100% on. He says he doesn't like what he calls hiding behind words like well-being and mollycoddling children. That doesn't really work. A teacher should know that. Well-being and mollycoddling are two completely different things. Well-being is generally regarded as something worth pursuing. Mollycoddling is generally regarded as something not worth pursuing, something that shouldn't be done. So you can look after children, you can talk about well-being without mollycoddling by conflating anyway, I'm overthinking it. Press 1 for overthinking. He says we have a zero tolerance towards defiance. And within days of taking over this school last June, he's in the news for sending children home because bits of their uniform weren't right. Anyone who swears or anyone who says no, not doing it, or walks away from a teacher, straight into detention. 2 or 3 families took their children out of the school straight away, he said, because they felt his policies were too strict. Most parents had been supportive. And then about 20 to 30 objected to the new behaviour policy he introduced last December. But he claims that we've never had to ask the same parent in twice. It's effective. So you've got detentions, you've got immediate send homes, you've got pupils being kept in school after hours as a punishment, including on a Saturday. It's a same-day detention policy. And he goes on to talk about how uniform is important. And I just want to know what you think. I just want to know what you think. That's all. I just wonder whether... Oh, dear. I'm just checking in on 10-year-old me, all right? I'm going to make sure he's okay with this. I just wonder whether most children perform better under strict teachers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is your phone-in. Do most children perform better under strict teachers? I want to hear from parents, I want to hear from teachers, and I want to hear from pupils. If you're of school age now, you need to get your parent or guardian's permission to ring me. But I've got a side question as well, which is going to cause me some wincing, I think. Especially if you're still at school. How annoying are disruptive pupils to other pupils? And I'd like to say sorry. 0345 6060 973. That old school report line, they're not laughing with you, they're laughing at you, or whatever it was. That idea. Everyone likes it when we make jokes. Everyone likes it when we cheek the teacher. Everyone likes it when we're disruptive. Do they? I don't think anyone's ever asked you this question before. The second bit. Did they really? I can't say they. I have to say we. Did we really get on your nerves when you were at school? When we were at school, the kids who were always chat back to the teacher. So, do most children perform better under strict, by which I mean easily understood, discipline? Not whimsical. Not he's in a bad mood. I'll probably get clattered today. But the same rules every day for everybody. And how annoying are disruptive pupils to other pupils? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And after this, I must give you the finest missing words round in history.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 21 minutes after 12. Okay, here it is, before we get stuck into this conversation. A tricky one for me, perhaps. Missing word round, best ever. Ready? Do you know this one? No, I think this is genius. It's not a headline, it's from the first paragraph of the story. Please don't cheat and send me your genuine answers to this question. Okay. A dog groomer's plans for a parlour have been recommended for approval despite the owner of the blank next door claiming it would end his business. Get your answers in quick. I shall try to remember before I go home to give you the real one. A dog groomer's plans for a parlour have been recommended for approval despite the owner of the blank or blank blank next door claiming it would end his business. All right? It's the best ever. However funny you think your answer is, unless it is the correct answer is funnier. John's in Tower Hamlets. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. So I'm a teacher in a secondary school, and I'm at the end of my tether. I've been a teacher for 10 years.
Yeah.
And the kids don't respect me. They muck around all the time. They don't want to learn. And I'm someone who loves my subject. I've got lots of energy for my subjects. I've got lots of subject knowledge. I like kids.
Yes.
And I'm not the strict disciplinarian type.
Right.
But if only I could be more consistent and more firm and less flexible.
Yeah.
They're driving me out of the classroom. I'm starting to dread going to work because half the children in the class at a secondary school don't want to learn. And the worst thing that you can do is get them to learn something. They resent it.
What about the other half?
The other half do, but they just sit in sort of... They're sort of in fear of the others.
Yes.
And your realisation that you know, those kind of disciplinarian teachers, as long as they've got a love for the subject and are knowledgeable of the subject, and then they can do it best. And trying to be funny, trying to have a fun classroom, trying to have energy in the room, allowing them to do, you know, they don't appreciate it.
This is a terrible call. I'm really feeling for you, mate.
It's awful.
It sounds awful, not just from the words that you're using, but from your voice as well and from your tone. It's not either or, is it? I guess. But you describe I don't know if it's innate, just an ability, you know, that we all talk about the teacher who could raise an eyebrow and the entire classroom would go silent. And you want to be a bit more like that, I think.
I want to be a bit more like that.
Yes.
Because if you're not like that, there's a group of students, and it's a third of the people in the class, 25%. It's a group that will just see it as weakness.
That's why I said they can smell weakness. It wasn't the word I wanted. It's not the right word to use.
Without mercy, every single time.
And you can't teach anybody else in the class while you're focusing on them.
Yeah, you can't. And unless the school gives you absolute support and intervenes to actually identify and isolate the ones who are causing all the trouble.
Yes.
You can't do it. And the thing is you're one and they are 20.
Yeah, of course.
And the schools, in the end, end up bending to the larger group and start undermining the actual teacher in the eyes of the rest of the students by not backing you up.
Because they don't want the fight. They don't want the hassle.
And it's your fault. It's your fault.
So,
and there aren't enough teachers. Like the 3 people in my job before me have all quit.
Yeah.
Because they can't do it. Because the kids are very challenging, very deprived. Because what I always wanted to do was to help these kids in this situation who have got nothing, and they don't want it. Yeah.
I think people confuse. This is the head teacher in Wales taught. I think people confuse strict with nasty. And I think he's right, actually. I think you can be strict. No nonsense. You do this, this happens. But what you don't have in your arsenal is consequences.
No.
Which means that even if you tried harder to be harder, you wouldn't have the recourse to punishment that this guy has given to all of his teachers. So
the issue is that kids, the bad kids, just see the school day as ending an hour after everybody else.
So they just go into detention as a baked-in consequence.
And walk home together, and it's not a problem. And the detention they also see is another opportunity
to mess about,
to be challenging.
Yeah. I don't know what to say to you, John.
I
want to say something inspirational. I want to say something inspirational and uplifting.
No.
But I've got nothing except that obviously, you know, and you can't reassure you by saying, because you don't feel like you're reaching the kids who do want to benefit from your administrations, and that's the hardest thing. This is one of the calls that I'm going to remember.
That's the most depressing part of it.
And you speak to the head, and the head doesn't give you anything that you need to improve.
Well, they do.
They try.
It's not enough. I'm just not the right sort of person to confront these. I don't have the resilience.
I hear you. No,
I'm not tough enough.
I hear you. And you know, there's a conversation to have about whether or not you should have to be, and whether or not you would have needed to be at some distant point in the past.
To be.
No, and maybe in a different school you wouldn't need to be. So, you know, think about that before you hang up your mortarboard forever. You know, there will be different environments, different contexts. I'm going to use the cliche horses for courses. You might not be the wrong horse. You might just be on the wrong course. You know?
Maybe, right.
I mean it.
Thank you.
You take care, though. All right?
Cheers, thanks a lot.
No, thank you. I do know a former head teacher in Tower Hamlets, so I could put you in touch with if you wanted to have a bit of a chat about something or not.
Yeah, why not?
Because he's a really inspirational guy. I'll try and dig that out. Give your details to Eleanor, and I'll try and. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the line. Actually, he usually is when we talk about teaching-related subjects. But forgive me if I can't make that happen, or if I've spoken out of turn. It's coming up to 12:30. Jack's in Hackney. Jack, what would you like to say?
I had a quote from an ex-student.
I'm going to get that phone line fixed. I'm going to go to the news and I'm going to come back because the last phone line wasn't brilliant, but I felt, I mean, crikey, I'm sure everyone agrees that John needed to be listened to, but that one's not great either. I'll give you another look at the best, I think the best missing words around ever. A lot of you have seen it, and that's cheating. It's not a butcher's, it's not a dog pound. Well, it's not a hot dog shop. Don't be cheeky. It's not a hairdresser's. Why would a dog? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. It's not a taxidermist. That's probably my favourite answer so far. What would be the business next door to a dog grooming salon that would kill off the next door establishment? A dog groomer's plans for a parlour have been recommended for approval, despite the owner of the next door claiming it would end his business. I'll tell you after the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
1 minute after 12 is the time. Listen, bad's a big word. Well, it's obviously not a very big word. It's only 3 letters long, but it is. So when John says bad, he will know better than anybody about ADHD, other diagnoses that will affect children's behaviour, trauma as well, all sorts of things. And also that some children, when they act up in school or behave badly in school, are doing so as a consequence of things that are happening outside school. In fact, the only boy at my prep school to be beaten more than me was was being abused horribly. And no one thought to say, why has he gone from being so well-behaved to being so naughty? So I'm aware of that, but I'm also aware of the fact that discipline works, and perhaps that conflation of nasty with strict has had a bit of a detrimental effect. Can you remember my pendulum swinging back on anything? I don't know how. The thing is, I don't know where my pendulum was on non-violent discipline. Corporal punishment, my pendulum swung 100% all the way across. But I don't know that we talked about this. I told you the story about when I was doing some. For want of a better word, mentoring in a school in South London, and I was struck. In fact, it came powering into my mind there, talking to John, because I saw it happen. And you think, what would you do? You've got a 16-year-old lad, 6'2" in his socks, just refusing to sit down. What do you do as a teacher? And that, I think, is the kind of scenario that John finds himself in. He says, sit down, and the kid says no. What do you do? It's funny, isn't it? 12:33 is the time. By popular demand, I have got another clip from Kemi Badenoch's speech yesterday that I will play you shortly. But or is it just what is everyone asking for? Oh no, everyone's asking for one of the clips that we've already heard. Okay, I can play you that as well. But I want to carry on with this conversation. Jack is in Hackney. Jack, sorry, where were we?
Hi, can you hear me?
That's better, yeah.
I was going to say that I had a quote from an old student, and I taught them during COVID.
Yes.
And they said that they preferred COVID online lessons. And I said to them, why? And they said to me, because this has been the only time in my whole school life that the lesson hasn't been disrupted and I could actually enjoy learning.
That's the kid you never hear from, isn't it?
Yep, that's it. And a lot of them, when you really get to know them, and you speak to them after class or between lessons or whatever, a lot more of the kids in every classroom do not like the disruptive ones, but they're scared. Because if you can disrupt the lesson, you don't care about detention, you don't care about isolation, you feel you can do whatever you want, you're swearing at the teacher, then as a kid, what that says is, I can do that to the adults who control this place. What do you think I'm going to do to you on your way home?
Yeah. And you know, that's at the extreme end of the experience. There'll be plenty of other kids who just don't want to be teased, and if they stand up for the teacher, or if they ask a what would you call it, a big man on campus, as it were, to pipe down a bit or wind their neck in, then you paint a target on your own back.
That's it. And one thing I also say is that I taught at a school that was very, very, very deprived. I mean, statistically, it was really, really struggling.
Yes.
And one thing that people often don't understand is that teaching is very much also a team kind of thing.
Yes.
And one thing that the worst, like the less good performing schools, one thing that they have as a disadvantage is that because behavior can be such a problem, teachers will leave the schools but not leave teaching. So you'll see a statistical rise in teachers in and out of those schools, but they'll stay long term at the other schools. So the schools that need some of the best and most dedicated staff, they don't get them for more than 2 years, and it's not right at all. Teams can't develop in teaching without time. You need time to learn who your year 7s are going to be in year 9. You need time to develop to know the school systems, the area, what works, what doesn't. You can't do this on teachers being there for 2 years because they're tired of being threatened. I've looked at my female colleagues be spoken to in a way that as a man, I have felt compelled to step in and say, excuse me, young man, in the real world, you can't speak to people like that. You can't lord over and intimidate this teacher here just because you don't want to do something. And you see how it just spirals and spirals. And when you pair it up with vexatious complaints, long working hours, and pay that can sometimes
and routine demonisation in the media as well, constantly being accused of all manner of transgressions and laziness and whatever else it may be. It's one of the great tropes of radio phone-ins whenever teachers take industrial action. It's open season on attacking them for all manner of perceived and imagined offences. So who'd do it? Did you hear John's call? Did you hear his voice?
Yeah, I
That's
did.
Bad,
you know
right?
what?
Go on.
He sounds like so many teachers I've spoken to.
Yeah.
And after work, you know, when the kids have gone in there, you might go into a classroom and you might actually talk to that teacher. You might talk to a teacher like him and say, you know what, I saw you earlier getting a bit of grief in this situation. And as a teacher, yes, you'll offer your support. You'll give advice, particularly for younger teachers coming into it, or teachers that are coming from abroad where education systems are different.
Yes.
But at the same time, you watch these people slowly deteriorate, and then eventually they leave. And I'll never forget how upset the kids get when their favorite teacher leaves because of a kid who they say is bullying the teacher in lessons, doesn't want to come in and do anything, and then takes it all away from everybody else.
I'm so glad you were listening today. I kind of knew this would be true, but I didn't know that we'd get it explained with such clarity. And that, can we put? I don't like generalising, but what in your experience, say 40 kids in a class, how many are the real problem? In other words,
5%.
5%.
No, 5 to 10 of them.
5 to 10 kids, so quite a lot. And if you, but is there a ringleader? So if you took out the ringleader, would someone replace the ringleader? Or of those 5 to 10, are 3 to 6 negotiable?
You know what?
Go on.
It's funny, right? Because I've always said that if you could take the top 5 kids in every year that are the most disruptive or the most resistant, you see the difference. And a big thing that we don't really like to talk about is that if it is that we do not like permanently expel kids from school like we used to back in the 60s or the 70s or whatever, those with the negative behavioral like patterns, it does spread to other kids.
Yeah.
So if you don't provide the things that they need or provide them with the environment they need, then it becomes like what they say, like if you put a rotten fruit...
It's a contagion. It's a contagion. Yeah. The bad apple turns the whole barrel bad. Before you go, a word, if you would, on actually just working with and on those 5 kids to make them less disruptive, to make them more engaged in class.
I would say that we need the freedom to be able to say, look, we know that all kids are supposed to learn X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. We just need the alternative provision places. Something I got really annoyed about in the last election was they spoke about getting teachers in school. They didn't talk about opening up no new alternative provisions. If I was in charge, I would say you can't open a school without opening alternative provision as well, because there are guaranteed kids who will not fit the system. Fitness classes. Let these kids get some exercise, and daily at that. If it's good enough for the private school kids, why can't regular state kids have an hour of exercise a day? Breakfast clubs, making sure that we're working with the parents. And some schools are starting to really work well.
And government policy, and certainly the Mayor of London's policy has moved in the right direction on those things. But as you say, it's going to cost money, and it's going to demand political will. Before you, just one other thing. I don't know that we appreciate the scale of difference a head teacher can make. So a new head teacher comes into a school where teachers are going on strike because of violence in classroom, not just disruption. And the right person, the right man or woman, can turn it around almost immediately. Is that true?
Well, to be honest with you, seeing what this head teacher is doing with Saturday detention. Yes. Because if it's just a head teacher that can come in and start putting in little disciplinary things like that, then I have to say yes. When it comes to things like alternative provisions and breakfast clubs and other support like that, they can do a bit, but it's also going to need to be like from government as well.
It's about the culture coming from the very top. And I'll tell you what I take away from this call. That's why I asked about numbers, and when you start whittling them down to the actual, for often through no fault of their own. A lot of people reminding me about ADHD and other diagnoses and trauma and having a terrible life at home and playing up and acting up for completely different reasons. But you have the strictness in place. What it can't cope with is the kid who gets detention on a Saturday and doesn't care. So you narrow it down to when you're talking about alternative provision. That's who needs alternative provision. That you whittle and whittle and whittle till you get to the child for whom no available sanction or discipline is effective, and they need something different. They need something new.
100%. 100%.
Are you still in teaching?
Yeah,
Thank
but
God for
equally,
that. Thank God for that.
I struggle like John did on some days, and some days you come home and you just really, really, really have the weight of the world on you. So much support to any of the teachers out there.
Yeah, absolutely that. And of course, it's easy for me to say, but that we need you. And the more you care, the more we need you, because the alternative to walking away is to stay put and just stop caring. You clearly care, both of you. It shines out of you. Thank you. I'll do the missing word round now because we deserve a giggle, right? And it is, as I said, quite a few of you got it. I love the idea that it's a therapist who works on people who are frightened of dogs. A dog groomer's plans for a parlour have been recommended for approval despite the owner of the blank next door claiming it would end his business. It's not a therapist working on people that are frightened of dogs. It's not a hairdresser. It's a couple of vaguely racist jokes that I'm sure you can work out for yourself. It's none of these things. It's perfect. It's perfect. It's this. A dog groomer's plans for a parlour have been recommended for approval despite the owner of the cat cafe next door claiming it would end his business. I don't know why. If it had said cattery or cat sanctuary, it wouldn't have been as funny. You know how fascinated I am by the mechanics of comedy. Why is cat cafe funnier than, I don't know, cat home? It's a cat cafe next door. And he said, well, hello, I'm John. I've just bought the next door premises. I love your cat cafe. How long have you been? Oh, I've been here 10 years. It's going really well. What are you going to be opening? Oh, I love pets as well. I love animals as well. I'm opening a dog groomers. What? Yeah, I'm opening a dog groomers next door to your cat cafe. It's lovely. And one apology. I I said the prodigy when I meant the shaman, didn't I? With reference to the fact that the head teacher of this school in Wales is called Alan Ebenezer. You can work it out for yourself. But while I'm doing slightly obscure cultural references, there is one that came in that I absolutely have to share for two reasons. Number one, it made me chuckle. And number two, It's oddly timely. And, of course, as ever, when I big up a message that's come into the programme, I'm going to struggle to find it now. So I'll find it while you talk among yourselves. It's coming up to 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:47. I wonder whether this was the intention they were going for when they wrote this bizarre speech that the leader of the opposition gave yesterday. And someone came up to them and said, what did that, they're doing some focus group afterwards. And they went up to you, or you sat down around a table, and they said, what did you think of? What did Kemi Badenoch's speech yesterday make you think of? And you respond by saying, well, Harry, it's funny you should say that, because it really did make me think of something quite specific. It made me think of that time that an alien in The Simpsons pretended to be Bill Clinton. So you just swap out the word Western values, swap Western values with freedom, and you've got it. It's there. It's right there. Kemi Badenoch 101, just with extra twirling. What is a cat cafe, asks Caroline. I know this. A cat cafe. There's one at New Street Station. I hope it's still there, because I'm about to give them a free advert. It's one of those weird corners of the shopping centre on top of New Street Station that you could go to the New Street Station in Birmingham 30 times and never find this corner. It's up near the top. It's a cat cafe. It's exactly what you'd expect. Well, perhaps not. It's a cafe where there are lots of cats walking around being cats. That's it. It's a cat cafe. I don't think you take your own cat, do you, to a cat cafe? They just have a lot of cat. You can take your own cat as well. Like, you wouldn't take your own cat. You can, but it might fight with the other cats. So it's like a cat. It's a cafe with lots of cats in it, Caroline. That's why they call it a cat cafe. And the idea is that you can pet a cat while you're in the cafe, while you're having a thing. They're just cats. You can give them a stroke or a nuzzle or a cuddle, or you can sit one on your lap, whatever it is that you're doing. That's not funny. Why are you putting jokes on the screen? They're not funny jokes. I can think my own bad joke. Here's the joke, right, from the producer. Are the cats in there hooked up to the Wi-Fi, ordering a couple of coffees every 8 hours to the fury of the... That is quite funny, actually. I should have sold it more. No, they're not. They're cats. They belong to the owners. They're not just cats that wander in off the street. But anyway, it was one of the best missing words round ever. And it's still there. Alyssa went last year. Well, it was there last year. It doesn't mean it's there now. And all the cats in the cat cafe at the top of New Street Station in Birmingham are adoptable, apparently. That's lovely. So they're rescue cats. It's a rescue cat cafe. John's in Shrewsbury to steer us back to more serious matters, namely discipline in schools. John, what would you like to say?
Well, it's the discussion so far has focused on two groups of people, the disruptive pupils and the pupils who just want to get on with their work.
Yeah, and the teachers, to be fair.
And the teachers.
Yeah.
And I felt very sorry for John and the other guy that you were
Jack.
talking to. But I think this is a failure of imagination, especially about the needs of those children. And also the other silent group within that class who are not able to get on with their work, but are also suffering, but their suffering is expressed through silence and then, self-harm and self-destructive behaviours.
Yes.
And they're not learning in the class either, but their needs are, not thought about at all. And neither are the needs of the disruptive children. These children then go on to, year 11 and fail their exams.
Yeah.
And then they go to further education college where it is very underfunded.
Are we suggesting that higher levels of discipline damage those children as well?
Not at all.
No,
and
okay.
Also, I'm not saying about... what I'm saying is there's a different way of doing clear boundaries.
Yes.
And that gets everybody's buy-in so that disruptive kid can feel like they belong in the school and want to work and want to participate because they know that their needs are getting met and that they are loved and respected in that school. And I come from a primary school background, and it was interesting, and this is not to criticise John at all,
of course,
but it was interesting that he said he loved his subject.
Yes.
And he liked the kids. Whereas if you talk to a primary teacher, they would say they love kids and they like their subjects. And children feel that.
I think that's
young
a tiny
adults
bit.
feel that.
I think that's a bit unfair. I'm going to be John's advocate here. You're splitting hairs on the words, and B,
I don't know. I think it sounds different if you're talking about 16-year-olds, loving 16-year-olds and liking your subject. I think you're reading too much into that. I'm just saying it because I didn't want to let it pass, and he's suffering. He's suffering enough as it is. If I'm going to get all mardy with you, I'd suggest that lasting, 20 years in a primary school in Shrewsbury and lasting 10 minutes in a comprehensive in a deprived area like Tower Hamlets is like comparing chalk and cheese.
Well, I did teach in Islington as well, and that's where I trained. I did my first 4 years.
I should just stress that for people outside London, that is not proving my point. That's proving John's point. It's only conservative politicians who pretend that Islington is some sort of middle-class haven where nothing bad ever happens. There's some of the highest levels of deprivation in the country are in Islington. You just wouldn't know that listening to Boris Johnson or the rest of them when they use it as a shorthand.
And also, can I correct you about rural towns like Shrewsbury? There is a lot of deprivation, and where I worked,
it was more the primary school point than the geography point. Actually,
So I think that successful secondary school teachers embrace this stuff without really realising it.
It comes naturally.
They form good attachments with children.
So, what do you think about this head teacher?
I think he's got to do what he's doing. Yeah. That school is obviously unsafe.
And the best line, I think, to take away from this is the danger of conflating strict with nasty.
Yeah, I think that's too simplistic, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think what school needs to do are make secondary schools especially places where everybody can achieve something and everybody feels valued. And the system isn't the teacher's fault. The Ofsted, the exam system and the curriculum make those children feel as though they don't belong there.
They will behave as if they don't want to be there, or they don't think that they should be there. It's great stuff. That's really great stuff. Thank you, and thank you for indulging my slight pushback on your earlier comments, because it's not mutually exclusive, and this perhaps is the point I've missed over the years. So the only bit of the tale of Ebenezer, Alan Ebenezer, is the bit where he appears to dismiss the word well-being, hiding behind words like well-being and mollycoddling. To me, they mean completely different things. One good, one not so good. But they're not mutually exclusive. He could easily argue, that a strict school is good for children's well-being. You don't have to buy into that sort of slightly weird culture war-y language of well-being being something we shouldn't care about. You could say that the children's well-being is better served by having clear, comprehensible rules and discipline. Children like routine, we all like routine, to be honest. So that bit there, you can talk like John did about the importance of looking after children and making them feel valued and making them feel loved. That does not mean that you are opposed to strictness or opposed to good rules or opposed to regimes that leave very little room for misbehaviour. The only thing you're left with, if we knit together a bunch of the calls that we've taken this hour, is the unreachable child, the unhelpable child. And I do believe that child, the one that you're left with when you've done everything that we've talked about today, the one who still won't respond, who still doesn't care about detention, who still can't behave in class, I think the key word there is can't. I don't think they're behaving like that through choice. I don't think that they can help themselves, but you can only arrive at that conclusion when you've done everything you can to help them. Last word on this to Louis, who's in Crystal Palace. Louis, it'll have to be brief. Thank you.
James, it's actually a pleasure speaking to you for the first time.
Likewise, thank you.
Listen, I'm a teacher. I'm working as a teacher in schools all across London for some time now by agencies. There are three. Imagine you're in the back of my class, right?
Yep. What do you teach? I want to get into the role.
I'm a specialist in PE, but I've covered all subjects apart from food tech.
Okay.
All subjects.
Blimey.
So imagine the class is disruptive. I've walked in and my introduction is first name Mr., last name John. If you didn't get it right, you didn't get it wrong. Right, now I've got your attention. Now, welcome to the cinema. There are 3 rules to the cinema. You are allowed to speak to me, myself, and I. That includes the work, whispering, the weather, and whatever. Right?
Yeah.
At that point, everyone then sits down, and if your pen is not onto the paper, I then identify if you cannot do the work. And there's a reason why you can't do the work, because you can't understand the formula. And once I understand you can't understand the formula, that's when we attack the problem. That's when the kids get on with the work. And I've done this over the years, and I've had kids come up to me at the end of the class and say, this is the most amount of work I produced in a lesson. Kids need the support. They need trust and a rapport. That's what's missing. That's a vital part that's missing.
And what do you do with the kid who's kicking off?
Talk to them.
Punch them?
I find out what talk to them. I find out what's going on.
I thought you said punch them.
No, talk to them. Talk to them. Find out what's going on. So why are you not doing the work? You don't understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
Why are you not doing the work? What is it you don't understand? Once they understand, you will be amazed.
I hear you. I know, I do. And that it's, engagement is such an interesting word, isn't it? It can mean so many different things in so many different contexts. And I don't want anyone to think Louis is suggesting it's easy. He obviously has a gift. It's something that it can be, like the earlier caller said, in Shrewsbury. It's some people don't know they're doing it. It just comes very naturally, and for others it doesn't. If you missed any of today's show, punch them. You can listen back on Catch Up.
I thought he said that too.
Did you think that? Thank goodness for that. You can listen back on
I also think you said a swear word, kind of, just afterwards.
Did I? Well, in shock.
Yes,
there you go. You can tell we're live. You can, if you want to hear me saying a swear word, you can rewind and pause live radio.
We'll kind of try. We'll pass it off as clearing your throat.
We will.
I think it was something else.
Listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind swearing. Yes. I'm sorry if that did happen. Obviously, let me make that absolutely.
No, it was very elegant.
As well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, known as Arthur to its mates. The best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. You may have noticed Sheila Fogarty is already here, and at 4 o'clock on LBC, Tom Swarbrick will be.
Oh, speaking of punching children...
Stop it!
James O'Brien on LBC.